Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little different. You've survived modern winters with central heating, insulated windows and weather apps that warn you days in advance. So yeah, you probably won't survive this either, but let's pretend you're waking up in ancient Sparta, 431 BCE, where winter wasn't just uncomfortable, it was a crucible that forged the deadliest warriors the world had ever seen. The snow-capped peaks of Mount Taygetus loom above you like sleeping giants, and the pre-dawn air bites at your skin with teeth of ice. But here's the thing you might not realise yet. While other Greek cities shuttered their training grounds and waited for spring, Sparta turned winter into their greatest weapon. So before you get comfortable in your warm bed, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm not going to chase you with a bronze spear over it. And hey, drop your city and the time you're watching this down in the comments. I love knowing who else is awake during these quiet hours, imagining what it would be like to face a Spartan winter with nothing but will and ancient wisdom. Now, find that perfect spot in your bed, slow your breathing, and let's step into the winter of 431 BCE, where the temperature has plummeted to levels that would shut down modern cities, but where 30 young warriors are about to learn that cold isn't an enemy to be avoided, it's a teacher to be embraced. You wake in the pre-dawn darkness of the Spartan barracks, and the first thing that hits you is the cold. Not the gentle chill of an autumn morning, but the brutal, bone-deep cold of a Laconian winter that has dropped to near freezing, a rarity in this Mediterranean climate. But when winter comes to the mountains of the Peloponnese, it comes with a vengeance that would humble warriors from the frozen steppes of Scythia. Your breath forms small, ghostly clouds that hang in the still air above your sleeping pallet, suspended like tiny spirits reluctant to dissipate. You can feel the cold stone floor radiating its chill upward through the thin straw mattress that serves as your only cushion against the unforgiving limestone beneath. The barracks around you are filled with the controlled breathing of 29 other warriors, each lying on identical pallets arranged in perfect rows along the stone walls. These aren't the elaborate quarters you might imagine from movies about ancient warriors. No crackling hearths, no thick furs, no braziers glowing with welcoming coals. The walls are thick limestone blocks quarried from the nearby mountains, fitted together with such precision that no mortar was needed, but they offer little warmth. The narrow windows are mere slits in the stone, designed more for defence than comfort, and through them you can see the first pale light of dawn, creeping across the snow-dusted peaks of Mount Taygetus, like liquid silver poured over jagged bronze. Here's a historical fact that reveals the extremity of Spartan conditioning. They were the only Greek city-state that continued full military training through the winter months. Contemporary accounts describe Athenian observers watching in amazement as Spartan warriors exercised nearly naked in snow, their bodies steaming in the frigid air like horses after a hard gallop, their movements precise and controlled despite conditions that sent visiting diplomats fleeing for warmth and wine. Your single himation, the red woolen cloak that marks you as one of the Spartiates, the warrior elite, lies folded beside your pallet with geometric precision. This cloak is your only protection against the elements, and you've learned through years of conditioning that it must serve as blanket, coat and shelter. The deep red wool, dyed with Kermes insects harvested from oak trees in the surrounding hills, is thick and tightly woven, each thread a product of helot labour in the valley below, but it's deliberately insufficient for complete comfort. You might wonder why society would intentionally deny its warriors adequate protection from the elements. The answer lies in a principle that modern military trainers are only beginning to rediscover. Controlled discomfort builds resilience that no amount of comfortable training can provide. It's like how modern athletes use ice baths and altitude training, except the Spartans lived this way every single day from childhood. As you sit up on your pallet, the cold air hits your skin like a physical blow, like diving into water you thought was shallow but turns out to be deep and shockingly frigid. You're wearing only a simple chiton, a linen tunic that reaches mid-thigh, no undergarments, no extra layers, nothing but the basic garment that serves as your daily wear. Your feet are bare, as they always are, and when you place them on the stone floor, the shock of cold travels up your legs like lightning climbing a tree, sharp and immediate and impossible to ignore. But here's something you might not expect. You've been trained not to flinch, not to gasp, not to show any sign of discomfort. Such reactions were beaten out of you years ago during your time in the Agoge. the brutal education system that transformed Spartan boys into living weapons. The training masters understood something profound about human psychology. The way you respond to discomfort in private becomes the way you respond to danger in battle. The air smells of limestone and wool, with faint undertones of sweat and the olive oil used to clean the floors. You can hear the distant call of a crow outside, its harsh cry cutting through the pre-dawn silence like a bronze blade through leather. The taste in your mouth is bitter from sleep and yesterday's meagre meal, a reminder that your body burns through calories like a furnace when constantly fighting cold. Fringe fact: some ancient sources claim that Spartan warriors could sleep naked in snow and wake refreshed, though this is likely exaggerated, probably the result of awed observers who couldn't believe what they were witnessing. What's certain is that they regularly trained in minimal clothing during winter months, developing a tolerance for cold that amazed other Greeks. Athenian writers often described Spartan winter practices with a mixture of admiration and horror, comparing them to the legendary endurance of Arctic peoples they'd only heard about in travellers' tales. The bronze bell rings once, its clear tone cutting through the pre-dawn silence like a blade through silk, and the sound seems to hang in the cold air longer than it should. Instantly, you and your 29 brothers in arms rise as one, moving with the fluid precision that comes from years of synchronized training. There's no groaning, no reluctant stretching, no complaints about the cold. Such indulgences are not merely discouraged, they're impossible. Your body responds to the bell with automatic obedience, muscles coiling with controlled energy despite the frigid air that makes every breath visible. You pull your himation around your shoulders with practiced efficiency, your fingers moving through the familiar motions even though they're already beginning to stiffen slightly from the cold. Every fold, every drape serves a purpose learned through experience and observation. The cloak isn't wrapped randomly. It's arranged to trap body heat while allowing freedom of movement, to protect vital organs while leaving arms and legs deliberately exposed to the elements. This calculated exposure is part of the conditioning system, systematically teaching your body to function in conditions that would disable ordinary men. The other warriors move with the same economical precision, their red cloaks dark against the grey stone walls in the growing light. In the pale dawn filtering through the narrow windows, you can see your breath, and theirs, forming small clouds that dissipate quickly in the mountain air. No one speaks. The morning routine requires no discussion. Every man knows his role. Every movement serves the collective purpose of preparing for another day of pushing human limitations beyond their normal boundaries. You might not realize that what you're experiencing has a name in modern physiology: cold-induced thermogenesis. Your body is beginning to generate heat through involuntary muscle contractions, not the violent shivering that wastes energy and signals loss of control, but subtle controlled tremors that burn calories to produce warmth. The Spartans discovered this principle through pure experimentation over generations, turning their warriors into human furnaces that could operate efficiently in any temperature. It's similar to how brown fat works in modern cold adaptation therapy, except they figured it out 2,400 years before anyone knew what mitochondria were. Your trainer, Lysander, already waits in the courtyard outside, standing like a bronze statue that's somehow learned to breathe. A scarred veteran of countless campaigns, his body is a map of Spartan warfare. A jagged line across his left shoulder from a Persian spear at Plataea, a missing finger from a sword stroke that didn't quite connect during a skirmish in Thessaly, burn marks on his forearms from siege warfare against a rebellious Helot stronghold. His himation hangs open despite the cold, revealing a torso marked by lean muscle and the particular kind of resilience that comes from decades of systematic hardship. When he speaks, his voice carries easily in the thin air, each word precisely chosen and delivered without wasted breath. Today we learn why Athenians huddle by their fires while we prepare for wars, he says, his breath forming a brief cloud that frames his weathered face. The cold you feel now is nothing compared to what awaits on campaign. A warrior who cannot fight in winter is no warrior at all. Here's a historical fact that demonstrates the practical value of this philosophy. During the Peloponnesian War, Spartan armies operated year-round while their enemies were forced to disband for winter months. This gave them strategic advantages that often decided entire campaigns before spring battles even began. While Athenian generals were comfortable in their homes, Spartan forces were repositioning, training, and preparing operations that would achieve surprise when warfare resumed. The courtyard is open to the sky, and frost covers the packed earth like a blanket of crushed diamonds sparkling in the growing dawn light. The temperature feels like it's barely above freezing, maybe 35 or 36 degrees Fahrenheit if you had such measurements, but the wind makes it feel colder, cutting through your cloak and chiton like they're made of summer linen instead of winter wool. You can feel the cold seeping into your bones, but you've learned something important. The first shock is always the worst, and if you can master your reaction to that initial assault, your body begins to adapt. Around you, the city of Sparta is beginning to wake. You can hear distant sounds, a helot woman singing as she draws water from a well, the rhythmic hammering of a smith already at work, the baying of goats being led to winter pasture. But these sounds feel distant, separated from you by the barrier that exists between warriors in training and the civilians who depend on them for protection. It's a subtle form of isolation that serves a purpose. You're being taught that your life isn't your own, that comfort is for others, that your purpose is service through suffering. Lysander leads your group toward the olive groves that stretch down the hillside from the barracks, moving with the economical gait of a man who has learned to conserve energy on long marches. The ancient trees, their silver-green leaves long since fallen to winter's demands, stand like twisted sentinels in the growing light, their gnarled trunks speaking of centuries weathering these same harsh seasons. Frost covers everything, the ground, the stone retaining walls built to prevent erosion, the bronze weapons practice posts standing at regular intervals, creating a crystalline landscape that catches and reflects the pale morning sun, like a field of scattered jewels. Your bare feet crunch on frozen grass with each step, the sound crisp and clear in the cold air. You feel the cold seeping up through your soles, but this sensation has become familiar, almost comforting in its predictability. Each step is building calluses that will serve you in summer campaigns, toughening the skin while teaching your nervous system to maintain sensitivity despite the protection. Here's where Spartan training reveals its genius. Instead of fighting the cold, you're taught to work with it. The sharp bite of frost on your skin becomes a kind of medicine, awakening every nerve, making you hyper-aware of your body and your environment. Your blood flows faster, pushed by a heart that's learned to work efficiently under stress. Your lungs expand more fully with each breath, extracting maximum oxygen from the thin mountain air, and your mind becomes crystal clear with the simple focus of survival and excellence. The silence of your group is broken only by the sound of controlled breathing and the soft crunch of footsteps on the frost-covered ground. 30 warriors moving through the winter landscape like ghosts, their bodies generating heat through motion, their minds focused not on discomfort, but on the knowledge that they're becoming something extraordinary. Every step on frozen ground is building calluses that will serve you in summer campaigns when you march 20 miles in full armour under the Mediterranean sun. Every breath of cold air is expanding your lung capacity for the moment when you'll need to fight for hours in the crushing press of phalanx combat. You might wonder how this compares to modern military training. Elite special forces units today use similar principles: cold water immersion, sleep deprivation, nutritional stress, but typically for limited periods. The Spartans lived this way for months at a time, year after year, creating adaptations that went far deeper than the temporary conditioning. As you reach the olive grove training ground, Lysander stops beside a clearing where snow has accumulated in patches between the trees, like white islands in a sea of frost-covered earth. The white powder sparkles in the growing daylight, and you can feel its coldness even through the calluses you've built over years of barefoot training. But this isn't just about toughening your feet. It's about rewiring your entire nervous system to function in conditions that would paralyze ordinary men. Strip, Lysander commands, and without hesitation, you and your brothers let your cloaks fall to the frozen ground in a synchronized movement that looks almost choreographed. 30 naked warriors stand in the winter dawn, their skin already pinking from the cold breath steaming in the frigid air like incense, rising from 30 human altars. But their faces remain impassive as bronze masks. This is the true test of Spartan conditioning, not just enduring discomfort, but maintaining combat readiness while experiencing it. The cold hits your bare skin like a physical assault, and you feel your body's immediate response, blood vessels constricting near the surface, muscle fibers tensing, every nerve firing signals about the hostile environment. But you've learnt to observe these sensations without being controlled by them. to experience cold as information rather than threat. It's a subtle psychological shift that makes all the difference between panic and performance. Here's a historical fact that modern scientists find remarkable. Spartan warriors showed physiological adaptations that contemporary accounts described, but that seemed impossible until recent research into extreme cold exposure. They developed increased brown adipose tissue, special fat that generates heat, and enhanced circulation patterns that kept extremities warm even in conditions that would cause frostbite in ordinary people. These weren't genetic advantages, they were earned through systematic training that began in childhood. The first exercise is deceptively simple, the kind of thing that sounds easy until you try it. You place your palms flat against the snow and hold the position. The cold burns against your skin like fire reversed, like touching a hot stove, except the pain signals confusion instead of heat. Every instinct screams at you to pull away. Every nerve in your hand sends urgent messages to your brain, demanding immediate action. But you've learned to compartmentalize pain, to experience it without being controlled by it, to observe sensation without judgment or reaction. Around you, your brothers maintain the same position, their faces masks of concentration, steam rising from their bodies as internal heat meets external cold in visible confrontation. The contrast is striking. Warriors whose bodies are literally steaming in freezing air, generating so much internal heat that it creates mist, yet holding perfectly still with hands pressed into snow that would send ordinary men screaming. This isn't torture disguised as training, it's applied science that the Spartans developed through generations of experimentation. By gradually exposing your extremities to cold, you're training your blood vessels to constrict and dilate more efficiently, teaching them to maintain core temperature while preserving enough peripheral circulation to prevent frostbite. Your body learns to redirect warm blood to vital organs, while maintaining enough circulation to prevent tissue damage. It's a delicate balance that most humans never master, but Spartans achieved it through daily practice that began when they were 7 years old. You might not know that there's a modern term for what you're experiencing: paradoxical cold response. After the initial shock, your hands actually start to feel warm as blood vessels dilate in a protective response. The Spartans discovered this phenomenon through trial and error, learning to recognize and trust the process even when every instinct said otherwise. As you hold your position against the snow, something remarkable begins to happen, something that validates centuries of Spartan training wisdom. After the initial shock, maybe 30 or 40 seconds of pure burning cold, your hands start to generate their own heat. The stinging sensation transforms into a dull ache, then into something almost warm, almost pleasant. Your body is literally adapting in real time, teaching itself to function under conditions it was never designed to handle naturally. Lysander walks among you, examining each warrior's form with the eye of a master craftsman inspecting his work, looking for trembling, for weakness, for the subtle signs that someone is reaching their breaking point. Your enemy will not wait for perfect weather, he says quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the still morning air. The Athenian hoplite who cannot grip his spear in winter rain is already defeated before the battle begins. You will fight when others cannot even stand upright. The truth of this statement would become clear in battles yet to come, conflicts where Spartan warriors fought effectively in rain, snow and cold that left their enemies struggling to maintain basic formation. Here's a historical fact that demonstrates this. During the siege of Plataea in 429 BCE, Spartan forces maintained combat effectiveness during winter storms that forced their enemies to abandon defensive positions. Contemporary accounts describe Spartans fighting in conditions where Athenian allies couldn't even hold their weapons properly. Now comes the truly ingenious part of Spartan cold conditioning, the element that separates their system from mere endurance training. Instead of simply enduring the discomfort, you're taught to use it as fuel for enhanced performance. The sharp clarity that comes from cold exposure becomes a weapon itself. Your senses heightened to supernatural levels, your reflexes quickened by the flood of stress hormones, your mind stripped of everything except the immediate demands of survival and excellence. The next exercise requires you to lie flat on your back in the snow, arms spread wide like you're making snow angels, completely exposed to the winter air. This is where the true psychological conditioning becomes apparent, where theory meets brutal reality. Your instincts scream at you to curl up, to conserve heat, to protect yourself from the killing cold that's seeping into your back, your shoulders, your legs. But you've learned to override these survival responses with conscious discipline that borders on the supernatural. As you lie there, staring up at the pale winter sky where a few stars still linger, in the growing dawn you focus on your breathing, not the quick, panicked breaths of someone freezing, but deep, controlled inhalations that flood your blood with oxygen and help generate internal heat. Each breath draws cold air deep into your lungs, but you have learned to warm it as it passes through your nasal passages, to extract maximum oxygen, to use the breathing itself as a form of heat generation. The Spartans understood what modern researchers call the Wim Hof method, thousands of years before it had a name, using breath control to influence the autonomic nervous system and build tolerance to extreme environmental conditions. They didn't have the science to explain why it worked, but they had something perhaps more valuable: generations of empirical observation showing that it did work. Fringe fact, some ancient sources describe Spartan warriors entering trance-like states during extreme cold exposure, reporting visions and spiritual experiences. While this might be dismissed as mythology, modern research into extreme cold exposure does document altered states of consciousness caused by the massive endorphin release and changes in brain chemistry that occur during controlled hypothermia. Scholars still debate whether these extreme practices truly made Spartans better soldiers, or if they were simply ritualistic displays of toughness, designed to intimidate enemies and build unit cohesion. But battlefield accounts from the Peloponnesian War and other conflicts suggest that Spartan warriors did indeed fight effectively in conditions that disabled other armies. Their reputation for invincibility wasn't just propaganda. It was built on this daily foundation of systematic conditioning that pushed human capabilities beyond their normal limits. The snow beneath you begins to melt slightly from your body heat, creating a thin layer of insulation between your skin and the frozen ground. A microclimate generated by your own internal furnace. But more importantly, your mind is learning to find calm in chaos, comfort in discomfort, peace in conditions that would send most people into panic. This mental conditioning was perhaps the most valuable aspect of Spartan winter training, the ability to think clearly and act decisively when every instinct demanded retreat. Around you, your brothers lie in similar positions, their bodies steaming slightly in the cold air as internal heat meets external chill in visible defiance of the environment. Steam rises from 30 warriors like incense from an altar, creating an almost mystical scene that speaks to the supernatural nature of what human beings can achieve when properly trained and motivated. If a stranger stumbled upon this scene, they might think they'd encountered some strange religious ritual, not understanding that this is the most practical military training ever devised. You might wonder about the long-term effects of such extreme conditioning, whether there's a price to be paid for, pushing the body to these limits. Modern sports science suggests that chronic cold exposure can indeed produce lasting adaptations, increased brown fat production for natural heat generation, improved circulation to extremities, enhanced stress hormone regulation, and most importantly, psychological resilience that extends far beyond physical challenges. As you finally rise from the snow after what feels like an eternity but is probably only 2 or 3 minutes, your body moves with fluid precision despite the cold. Your skin is pink and alive with circulation, your muscles primed for explosive action despite their exposure to temperatures that should have left them stiff and useless. The winter hasn't defeated you. It has revealed capabilities you never knew you possessed. You understand now why the Spartan saying, "return with your shield or on it," carried such weight among warriors trained to this level. Men conditioned to transcend normal human limitations didn't retreat from anything, including death itself. The sun climbs higher now, but its winter light provides little warmth as you gather your cloaks and prepare for the next phase of training. Your body has found its cold weather rhythm, blood circulating efficiently through patterns learned over years of conditioning, muscles generating heat through controlled tension that's become second nature, mind focused on the simple reality of excellence in this moment. This is the state the Spartans called being present with the gods, a clarity of awareness that came only through extremes that lesser men couldn't endure. Here's something you might not expect: you're actually starting to feel good. The endorphin rush from extreme cold exposure creates a natural high that modern ice bath enthusiasts spend hundreds of dollars to experience. But for you, this is just Tuesday morning, another step in the endless journey of becoming worthy of the name Spartan. Lysander leads you through a series of footwork drills on the frozen ground, each step deliberately placed on the most challenging surfaces available. Sharp gravel, patches of ice, frozen mud with hidden stones embedded like teeth, waiting to bite unwary feet. The sound of 30 warriors moving through these exercises creates a rhythm. Crunch, step, slide, crunch, like a strange percussion instrument played by feet that have become toughened beyond normal human limits. Your feet, after years of this conditioning, have developed calluses thick enough to provide insulation, while maintaining the sensitivity needed for balance and proprioception. This is one of the paradoxes of Spartan training. The toughening process doesn't deaden sensation, it refines it. You can feel every texture beneath your feet, the difference between frost-covered grass and ice-covered stone, between frozen mud and snow-covered earth, with a clarity that would be impossible in boots. Here's a historical fact that demonstrates the practical value of this. Barefoot conditioning. Spartan warriors could march 20 to 30 miles per day over rough terrain without the foot injuries that plagued other armies. While their enemies dealt with blisters, sprains and infections from poorly fitted sandals, Spartans moved with the sure-footed efficiency of mountain goats, their toughened feet requiring no protection and creating no supply burden. The drills intensify as Lysander introduces combat movements, lunges, pivots, rapid directional changes, all performed on frozen ground that would send ordinary soldiers slipping and falling. You practice the fundamental movements of phalanx warfare, the shuffle step that maintains formation density, the sudden surge forward that creates momentum for spear thrusts, the controlled retreat that keeps shields overlapping while giving ground. You might wonder how barefoot training translates to actual combat where warriors wore sandals or fought in armour. The answer lies in proprioception, the body's awareness of its position in space. Warriors who trained barefoot developed such refined foot sensitivity that they could feel battlefield terrain through their sandals, adjust balance automatically, and maintain a footing in conditions that would topple less conditioned soldiers. The exercises continue until your feet burn from the combination of cold and exertion, until every step requires conscious effort to maintain precision. This is intentional. Lysander is teaching you to maintain technique even when exhausted, to fight effectively when your body is screaming for rest. The cold amplifies the challenge, making every movement harder, every technique more demanding. But here's where the brilliance of the system becomes apparent. By training in conditions harder than anything you'll face in battle, you create a reserve of capability that emerges under pressure. When you finally fight in summer warmth, when you march in sandals instead of barefoot, when you engage enemies who haven't endured this conditioning, the difference will feel like having superpowers. One warrior, a younger recruit named Aristodemos, stumbles during a complex pivot maneuver, his foot catching on a hidden root beneath the frost. Instantly, the warrior behind him adjusts position to compensate, maintaining the formation integrity even as Aristodemos recovers his footing. This is the kind of automatic mutual support that saves lives in battle. Warriors so aware of each other's positions that they compensate for errors without conscious thought. Lysander notices the stumble but says nothing. In combat, warriors stumble, wounds impair movement, exhaustion causes errors. The question isn't whether mistakes happen, it's whether the unit can maintain effectiveness despite them. The fact that the formation held, that the error was compensated without disrupting the whole, is more important than the mistake itself. Fringe fact. Some ancient sources claim that Spartan warriors could identify each other by footstep sounds alone, distinguishing individuals by their unique gait patterns. While this might be exaggerated, it reflects the profound attention to movement and positioning that characterize their training. Modern research into proprioception suggests that such recognition is actually possible for people who train together extensively. The footwork session concludes with a challenge that seems impossible. You must run up a steep hillside covered in frost and loose stones, maintaining formation without slowing pace. The slope is severe enough that you're essentially climbing, your feet scrabbling for purchase on surfaces that offer minimal friction. But this is where years of conditioning pay off. Your toughened feet find holds that would be invisible to ordinary soldiers. Your refined balance allows recovery from near slips that would topple others. As you reach the summit, breathing hard but controlled, you can see the entire Laconian valley spread below. The view is spectacular. The Eurotas River winding through winter-brown fields, the city of Sparta clustered along its banks. The surrounding mountains rising like walls designed by gods instead of geology. But Lysander doesn't give you time to admire the scenery. "This is why we train in the mountains," he says, gesturing toward the valley. Down there, helots sleep in warm beds. Perioikoi merchants count their profits by hearthside. But you stand here in the cold, pushing beyond comfort, because comfort creates weakness, and weakness creates slaves. The political philosophy embedded in this statement reveals a truth about Spartan society. Their extreme conditioning wasn't just military training, it was the foundation of their entire social system. By pushing themselves beyond what they demanded of subject peoples, they justified their dominance. Whether you agree with this logic or not, you can't deny its effectiveness in creating warriors who believed absolutely in their superiority. Here's a historical fact that contextualizes this worldview. Sparta controlled a population of helots, state-owned serfs, that outnumbered them 7-1. Their military supremacy wasn't optional. It was existential. Every winter training session, every hardship endured was insurance against rebellion and conquest. This adds a layer of understanding to their extreme methods. They weren't just creating warriors, they were creating walking deterrents. The descent proves even more challenging than the ascent, requiring different muscle groups and different balance techniques. You must control your speed while maintaining formation, preventing the natural tendency to rush downhill that would scatter your ranks and create chaos. Your feet, numb from prolonged contact with frozen ground, must somehow find secure placement on surfaces you can barely feel. But here's where the training reveals another layer of sophistication. The numbness itself becomes a teacher. You learn to trust, proprioception over sensation, to believe in your body's knowledge even when conscious awareness is limited. This skill will prove invaluable in battle. When pain, fear, and confusion overwhelm normal senses, you'll be able to function on automatic systems developed through exactly this kind of training. As you reach the bottom of the hill, Lysander allows a brief rest period, maybe 30 seconds, to catch your breath and shake out your legs. You can feel your feet beginning to warm now, blood flow returning as your body recognizes you've stopped the demanding exercise. The sensation is painful, the fire and needles feeling of circulation returning to the cold, stressed tissue, but you've learned to welcome it as a sign of your body's resilience and recovery capacity. Around you, your brothers show the same controlled recovery. Deep breaths, subtle movements to maintain warmth, faces that betray no sign of the discomfort you know they are experiencing. This collective stoicism isn't just for show, it's another layer of conditioning, teaching you that suffering shared but not displayed creates stronger bonds than suffering dramatized and complained about. You might notice that nobody is injured despite the brutal training on treacherous surfaces. This isn't luck. It's the result of progressive conditioning that has strengthened not just skin, but tendons, ligaments, and bones themselves. Modern sports medicine recognizes that bones adapt to stress through a process called Wolff's Law, becoming denser and stronger where stress is applied. Your feet, subjected to years of this training, have developed bone density and architecture that makes stress fractures nearly impossible. The sun reaches what passes for its zenith in winter, maybe 30 degrees above the southern horizon, and you can feel slight warmth on your face, though it does little to combat the overall cold. The quality of light changes, becoming slightly less harsh, casting shorter shadows across the frost-covered training ground. But there's no break for lunch, no pause for meals. That will come later, much later, after training is complete. Lysander leads your group down a rocky path toward the Eurotas River, which flows year-round through the Laconian Valley, fed by snowmelt from the surrounding mountains and underground springs that never freeze. Even in winter, this river runs cold and fast, and the sound of rushing water grows louder as you approach, a constant susurration that sounds almost alive, almost conscious, like the river itself is aware of what's about to happen and is laughing in anticipation. The Eurotas runs clear and swift between rounded stones polished smooth by countless floods, its surface reflecting the pale winter sky like burnished bronze hammered into liquid form. Ice doesn't form here, the current is too strong, but the water temperature hovers just above freezing, maybe 34 or 35 degrees Fahrenheit, if such measurements existed. Steam rises from the surface where warmer water meets cold air, creating an ethereal mist that makes the scene look like the border between the world of men and the realm of the gods. Here's a historical fact that demonstrates Spartan mastery of water-based winter training. During the Peloponnesian War, Spartan forces repeatedly gained tactical advantages by fording rivers in winter that their enemies considered impassable. This wasn't just courage, it was the result of systematic conditioning that allowed warriors to maintain combat effectiveness in water cold enough to incapacitate ordinary soldiers within minutes. Athenian accounts describe watching in disbelief as Spartan units crossed rivers that sent their own soldiers into hypothermic shock. Without ceremony, Lysander wades directly into the river, his cloak thrown back over his shoulders, securing it so it won't drag in the current. The water rises to his knees, then his waist, but his expression never changes, as though he's walking through summer meadows instead of water that could kill an unprepared man within minutes. The river is another teacher, he calls back to you, his voice carrying clearly over the sound of rushing water. It will show you truths about yourself that comfort never reveals. One by one, you and your brothers follow, and the first step is a shock that makes the morning's snow training feel gentle by comparison. The cold water is so intense it feels like being crushed by an invisible giant, every nerve firing simultaneously in protest against this assault on human limitations. Every instinct screams at you to leap back onto dry land. Every cell in your body demands immediate retreat from this killing environment. You might not realize that what you're experiencing has a name in modern emergency medicine: cold water shock response. Your breathing automatically becomes rapid and shallow, your heart rate spikes dramatically, your blood pressure surges. For unprepared individuals, this response can cause drowning even in shallow water. They literally cannot control their breathing long enough to keep their head above water. But you've been trained to override this response, to maintain controlled breathing despite every physiological signal screaming panic. The water swirls around your calves, then your knees, then your thighs, each inch higher a new test of will and conditioning. The current wants to knock you off your feet, pushing against your legs with surprising force. The cold wants to lock your muscles into useless rigidity, turning flexible warrior bodies into frozen statues. But you learn to work with both forces rather than against them, finding balance within the chaos. Your stance becomes fluid, responsive, alive, weight shifting subtly to compensate for the current, muscles engaging and releasing in rhythmic patterns that maintain stability without rigidity. This is adaptation at its finest, the human body learning to dance with forces that could easily destroy it if approached with rigidity instead of flexibility. Fringe fact: some ancient sources claim that Spartan warriors could remain motionless in freezing water for hours, but this is almost certainly exaggerated, probably the result of awed observers who couldn't believe what they were witnessing, who rounded minutes into hours in the retelling. What's more likely is that Spartans developed sophisticated techniques for staying warm through subtle movement and controlled breathing, skills that would prove invaluable in amphibious military operations that other armies couldn't attempt. As you stand waist-deep in the rushing water, something remarkable begins to happen that validates centuries of Spartan training wisdom. Your body's adaptation systems kick into overdrive with efficiency that would impress modern physiologists. Blood vessels near the surface constrict dramatically to preserve core temperature, shunting blood away from skin and extremities. Meanwhile, deeper vessels dilate to maintain circulation to vital organs: heart, lungs, brain, liver. Your heart rate increases but remains steady and controlled, not the panicked racing of someone drowning, but the elevated rhythm of an engine running at high efficiency. Most importantly, your mind achieves a state of focused calm that modern athletes spend years trying to develop through meditation and visualization techniques. The water forces you into the present moment with absolute clarity. There's no room for past regrets or future worries when every second requires complete attention to maintain balance and breathing. The water training serves multiple purposes beyond simple cold conditioning, revealing the sophisticated nature of Spartan military science. The constant resistance of the current creates a full-body workout that builds functional strength directly applicable to combat situations. The same muscle patterns used to maintain position against current are used to hold formation against enemy pressure. The mental discipline required to maintain composure while experiencing extreme discomfort builds the kind of psychological resilience that no amount of comfortable training can provide. And the simple act of learning to function effectively while every nerve in your body protests creates warriors who can fight through injuries, exhaustion, and environmental conditions that would break lesser men. When you've learnt to think clearly in freezing water, the chaos of battle feels almost manageable by comparison. Lysander demonstrates the next technique, controlled breathing while submerged. He takes a deep breath. You can see his chest expand fully, watch his diaphragm descend, and then disappears beneath the surface. His form wavers through the clear water as he holds position against the current, feet planted firmly on the riverbed, body angled slightly forwards to use the current's pressure to help maintain position. When he emerges 30 seconds later, his face is serene, almost peaceful, as though he's just finished a refreshing swim in summer warmth rather than an ordeal that would kill most men. The cold teaches you to breathe properly, he explains. Water streams from his greying hair, droplets catching the pale winter light like liquid diamonds. Panic shortens breath and wastes energy. Discipline lengthens it and creates strength. A warrior who masters his breathing in the river can fight for hours on the battlefield, while his enemies collapse from exhaustion. Here's a historical fact that validates this claim. Spartan warriors were known for their exceptional endurance in prolonged combat. During the Battle of Mantinea in 418 BCE, Spartan forces maintained combat effectiveness through hours of fighting that left their enemies exhausted and unable to maintain formation. Contemporary accounts attribute this partly to superior breathing techniques that allowed efficient oxygen use even under extreme physical stress. One by one, you practice this submersion technique, learning through direct experience why it became a cornerstone of Spartan training. The first time your head goes under, the cold water feels like a helmet of ice closing over your skull, pressing against your temples with crushing force. The temperature is so shocking that your body's first instinct is to gasp, which would be fatal underwater. Your lungs want to gasp for air that isn't there. Your limbs want to thrash in panic toward the surface, but you force yourself to remain still with the same discipline you'd use to maintain formation in battle. The river sounds different underwater. The rushing current becomes a deep rumble that you feel in your chest as much as hear with your ears. You can feel every stone beneath your feet with supernatural clarity, every fluctuation in the current's pressure against your body. The cold is all-encompassing, total, but after the initial shock, something shifts. Instead of pure sensation overwhelming thought, you find a kind of clarity in the uniformity of cold. Gradually, through repetition that borders on the obsessive, you learn to find stillness even in this extreme discomfort. The secret, you discover, isn't to fight the cold, but to become one with it, to let it flow through you without resistance while maintaining the core of heat and awareness that defines your essential self. This philosophical approach to physical training reflects the sophisticated nature of Spartan warrior culture, which combined practical military preparation with deeper insights into human potential. You might notice how this connects to the broader Greek philosophical traditions emerging in cities like Athens during this same period. While philosophers like Socrates discussed virtue and knowledge in comfortable symposiums, Spartans were discovering similar truths through physical ordeal. The wisdom gained from submersion in freezing water, about acceptance, adaptation, and inner strength, parallels insights that would later be formalized by Stoic philosophers. Except Spartans lived these principles instead of just talking about them. The training continues for what feels like hours but is probably only 30 or 40 minutes. Time distorts when every second requires conscious effort to override survival instincts. You practice moving through the water with weapons. Wielding a spear while maintaining balance against current requires entirely different mechanics than dryland fighting. You practice maintaining formation while numbed by cold, learning to judge distance and spacing when you can't feel your feet clearly. You even practice underwater wrestling, an exercise that seems absurd until you understand its purpose. If you can maintain technique while unable to breathe, while surrounded by killing cold, while fighting against current and opponents simultaneously, then normal combat conditions will feel easy by comparison. It's the ultimate expression of the Spartan training philosophy: make training harder than war, and warriors will welcome battle as relief from training. Contemporary accounts from other Greek armies reveal genuine fear of Spartan warriors who could fight effectively in conditions where others could barely function. This wasn't superstition, it was practical recognition of capabilities that seemed to transcend normal human limitations. Athenian generals specifically adjusted their battle plans during winter campaigns to avoid confronting Spartan forces in conditions that favoured their superior conditioning. As you finally emerge from the river, your body steams in the cold air like a living furnace, every muscle fibre alive with the controlled energy that comes from successful adaptation to extreme conditions. Every nerve is hyper-aware, every sense sharpened to preternatural acuity. The world seems impossibly clear and sharp, as if the cold has stripped away all unnecessary sensations and left only what's essential for survival and victory. This clarity, this aliveness, is what the Spartans called the warrior's gift, a state of being that could only be earned through extremes that tested the very limits of human endurance. It's a condition that modern extreme athletes spend fortunes trying to recreate through ice baths, controlled hypothermia, and other techniques that pale in comparison to the systematic conditioning that Spartan warriors achieved through daily practice over decades. You understand now why Spartan mothers told their sons to return with their gear, their shields, or on them, to come home victorious or dead, never in defeat. Warriors forged in conditions like these didn't know how to retreat. They had pushed so far beyond normal human limitations that death seemed less frightening than the dishonour of showing weakness. This wasn't fanaticism or brainwashing. It was the natural result of discovering through direct experience just how much the human spirit can achieve when properly trained and motivated. As you stand dripping beside the ureters, your cloak wrapped around your shoulders but providing little immediate warmth against the mountain wind, you become aware of something deeper than individual conditioning taking place. Around you, 29 other warriors share this exact experience. The same cold biting into water-soaked skin, the same triumph of having conquered the river's challenge, the same transformation happening at cellular and spiritual levels. This shared ordeal creates bonds that go beyond friendship or loyalty. It forges what the Spartans called homoios, the brotherhood of equals who had proven themselves in the crucible of systematic hardship. Warriors who suffered together, who pushed beyond their limits together, who discovered their true capabilities together, would die for each other without hesitation. The cold wasn't just tempering individual bodies, it was welding souls into an unbreakable collective weapon. You might not realise that this communal aspect of Spartan training was just as important as the individual conditioning, maybe even more so. Modern military psychologists understand that unit cohesion, the willingness of soldiers to fight for their comrades, is often more important than individual skill or courage. Soldiers don't fight for abstract concepts like honour or country in the heat of battle. They fight for the man beside them, the brother, who shares their suffering and their glory. The Spartans discovered this principle through direct experimentation with shared hardship that created emotional bonds stronger than family ties. And they discovered something else. When 30 men share extreme hardship, each one draws strength from the other's endurance, creating a reinforcing cycle that enables achievements impossible for individuals acting alone. Lysander gathers the group in a circle beside the river, and you notice that despite the brutal training, no one is missing. No one has quit, collapsed, or asked for mercy. This isn't because Spartans were naturally tougher than other men. Genetic studies would later show they were no different physiologically than other Greeks. It's because the entire system was designed to make individual failure feel like betrayal of the Brotherhood. When you're suffering but see 29 others suffering equally without complaint, quitting becomes psychologically impossible. When you're tempted to give up but know that doing so would burden your brothers with your weakness, endurance becomes the only acceptable option. This is social conditioning at its most powerful, using group dynamics to push individual performance beyond natural limits. Here's a historical fact that reveals the true genius of Spartan conditioning. Their armies had the lowest desertion rates of any force in the ancient world. and the lowest casualty rates despite consistently fighting against larger enemy forces. Soldiers who had trained together in conditions worse than most battles simply didn't abandon their comrades. The winter training wasn't just preparing individual warriors, it was forging unbreakable military units that functioned like single organisms with thousands of limbs. "Look at your brothers," Lysander commands, and you scan the faces around you. Some are pale from cold, skin showing the slight blue tint of deep chill. Others are flushed with exertion, blood rushing to the surface as bodies fight to maintain temperature. But all show the same expression of calm determination that comes from discovering capabilities they never knew they possessed. These aren't men pretending to be unaffected by hardship, they're men who have genuinely transcended their fear of discomfort through systematic conditioning and mutual support. The next exercise demonstrates this principle with elegant simplicity. You're paired with another warrior and told to share body heat while maintaining combat readiness. This isn't about physical intimacy. Greek military culture had complex attitudes towards same-sex relationships, but this exercise is about survival pragmatism that teaches crucial lessons about cooperation under stress. Two bodies can generate and conserve warmth more efficiently than one, but only if both warriors can suppress their individual discomfort for the common good. You stand back to back with Cleomenes, a warrior roughly your age whose family farms the harsh mountain slopes north of the city, terracing the rocky hillsides to grow barely enough grain to meet their obligations. His skin is warm against yours despite the cold. You can feel the heat radiating from his back into yours, a tangible reminder that you're not facing this alone. You can feel his controlled breathing, his steady heartbeat transmitted through the contact, the slight tremor of muscles generating heat through controlled tension. Together, you create a small zone of shared warmth while keeping your eyes alert for Lysander's next command, your body's relaxed, but ready for instant action. It's a strange sensation, feeling vulnerable due to the cold and wet, yet also feeling safer than you would alone, stronger through connection than through isolation. This exercise teaches several lessons simultaneously with the efficiency that characterizes all Spartan training. Physical, how to maximize heat conservation through intelligent body positioning and cooperation, angles of contact, surface area optimization, mutual support that allows both partners to relax muscles that would otherwise be tensed against cold. Mental, how to find comfort through teamwork rather than individual effort, learning that vulnerability is shared becomes strength rather than weakness. Military, how to maintain unit cohesion even under extreme stress that would shatter less disciplined forces. The Spartans understood something that modern armies are still learning. Military units are organisms, not collections of individuals, and every training, exercise must reinforce this organic unity. Warriors who learned to function as extensions of each other didn't need constant supervision during battle. They operated by instinct, and their instincts have been shaped by countless hours of shared hardship that created bonds stronger than individual self-preservation. Fringe facts: some ancient sources describe Spartan warriors sharing body heat in snowbanks during winter campaigns, pressed together in formations that confused Roman observers centuries later, who couldn't understand whether it was tactical positioning or something else. The truth was probably purely practical. Warriors who could sleep in tightly packed groups maintained warmth that would be impossible individually, turning a biological necessity into a tactical advantage. Now comes one of the most psychologically demanding exercises in the Spartan winter training regimen, one that tests trust at levels that seem superhuman. Each warrior must remain perfectly motionless in the cold while his partner performs weapon drills around him. You become a living target dummy while Cleomenes practices spear thrusts and shield movements inches from your body, his bronze spear point passing within a hand's breadth of your throat and chest. The trust required for this exercise is extraordinary, bordering on the superhuman. Any flinch, any involuntary movement caused by cold-numbed muscles spasming could result in serious injury or death. But more than trust, it requires the complete suppression of individual survival instincts in favour of group objectives. You're learning to subordinate your personal safety to the needs of your training partner, and by extension, your military unit, a lesson that will prove crucial in the chaos of battle where individual hesitation can doom entire formations. As Cleomenes' bronze spear point passes within inches of your face, close enough that you can feel the wind displacement, You focus on breathing steadily and maintaining perfect stillness despite every nerve in your body screaming warnings about the proximity of sharp metal. The cold has made your skin hypersensitive, so you feel the wind displacement from each thrust with supernatural clarity, the warmth radiating from his moving body creating subtle temperature differentials in the air around you, the subtle vibrations in the ground as he shifts his stance transmitted through your numb feet. But instead of fear, you feel a strange kind of peace that the Spartans called ataraxia, tranquility in the face of danger that comes from complete confidence in your training, your partner, and the system that has brought you to this moment. This is not reckless disregard for safety, it's the disciplined calm of a warrior who has learned to function effectively regardless of external circumstances. You might wonder how this level of trust develops. The answer lies in months and years of progressive training, where trust is built through incremental challenges, each slightly more demanding than the last. By the time you reach this level, weapons passing inches from vital areas, you've already trusted your partner hundreds of times in slightly less dangerous situations. The progression is so gradual that what seems impossible to outsiders feels almost natural to those within the system. The roles reverse, and now you perform weapon drills while Cleomenes stands motionless. His trust in your control is absolute, just as yours was in his. A mutual dependence under extreme conditions that creates bonds transcending normal human relationships. You would literally die before letting this man down, and you know he feels the same about you. This is how Spartan training created armies that fought not just for king and country, but for each other, with a devotion that their enemies couldn't match or understand. Modern military historians often puzzle over how Spartan armies maintained discipline in chaotic battle conditions, where individual soldiers couldn't see or hear their commanders clearly due to the noise, dust, and confusion of combat. The answer lies in training like this. Warriors who had learned to function as extensions of each other didn't need constant supervision or detailed orders. They operated by collective instinct shaped by years of shared experience, creating military units that responded to changing conditions with the fluid precision of a single organism. As this exercise concludes, you notice that the cold has become almost secondary to the intense concentration required for the partnership. Your body continues generating heat through controlled tension, blood flowing with the enhanced circulation that comes from extended cold exposure. But your mind is focused entirely on external awareness rather than internal discomfort. This shift in attention is perhaps the most valuable skill of all, the ability to function effectively regardless of physical conditions or emotional states. Here's a historical fact that demonstrates this. At the Battle of Thermopylae, Spartan warriors fought effectively for 3 days in conditions that included wounds, exhaustion, heat, dehydration, and the psychological stress of knowing they would die. Contemporary accounts describe them maintaining formation precision and combat technique even as they were being overwhelmed by massive numerical superiority. This wasn't supernatural endurance, it was the result of training that taught them to function at peak effectiveness regardless of circumstances. The sun reaches what passes for afternoon in winter, maybe 2 or 3 hours past noon, and you realise you've been training for almost 8 hours with no food and minimal rest. Your body should be exhausted, but instead you feel alive in ways that are hard to describe. The endorphin release from extreme cold exposure has created a natural high. The sense of accomplishment from conquering impossible challenges has built confidence, and thus, bonds with your brothers have deepened into something that feels unbreakable. Lysander allows a brief rest period, maybe 5 minutes to adjust positions and prepare for the next phase. You use the time to observe your surroundings with the enhanced awareness that comes from extended cold exposure. The winter landscape looks almost painfully beautiful, every branch outlined in frost, every stone casting sharp shadows, the river running dark and swift like liquid obsidian through banks of white snow. You might notice how your senses have changed throughout the day. Colours seem more vivid, sounds more distinct, textures are more pronounced. This isn't imagination, it's a documented effect of controlled cold stress. Your nervous system, flooded with norepinephrine and other stress hormones, has entered a state of heightened awareness that apex predators experience during the hunt. The Spartans stumbled onto this neurochemical enhancement without understanding the biology, but they understood the results. Around you, warriors are performing small maintenance tasks that reveal the attention to detail embedded in Spartan culture. Cleomenes is checking his feet for cuts or abrasions that could become infected if not addressed. Another warrior, Philippos, is wringing water from his cloak with efficient twisting motions that extract maximum moisture. A third is performing subtle stretches that maintain muscle flexibility despite the cold, small movements that look casual but serve crucial purposes. These aren't official instructions from Lysander, they're habits ingrained through years of training, small rituals that separate professionals from amateurs. In modern military parlance, this would be called personal administration, the individual responsibility each soldier takes for maintaining combat readiness. But the Spartans developed these habits through trial and error, learning that warriors who didn't maintain their bodies during brief rest periods paid the price during the next training phase. Fringe fact: ancient sources describe Spartan warriors as almost obsessively concerned with personal grooming and equipment maintenance, which confused other Greeks who associated such attention with vanity rather than military efficiency. But the Spartans understood something profound. Small acts of self-care during harsh conditions prevent catastrophic failures later. A cut that's cleaned and monitored never becomes the infection that kills you 3 weeks into a campaign. The rest period ends with Lysander's sharp whistle, a sound that cuts through the mountain air and instantly brings 30 warriors to attention. "We move to the caves," he announces, and you feel a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. The cave training is legendary among Spartan warriors, spoken of in the same tones that veterans use to describe their first battle. A threshold experience that separates those who have endured it from those who haven't, the march to the Spartan. Caves takes you higher into the mountains, following narrow paths that wind between rock formations sculpted by millennia of wind and weather. The temperature drops noticeably with altitude, maybe losing a degree or two for every few hundred feet of elevation. Your breath comes harder now, not from exertion, but from the thinning air that makes each inhalation slightly less satisfying than the one before. The terrain becomes increasingly challenging. Loose scree that slides underfoot, exposures where a misstep would send you tumbling down rocky slopes, narrow ledges where you must move single file with stone walls on one side and empty air on the other. But this is exactly why Lysander chose this route. Warriors who can maintain formation and composure on terrain like this, while cold and tired, can maintain them anywhere. You might wonder how this mountain training connects to the relatively flat terrain, where most hoplite battles occurred. The answer reveals the Spartan long-game thinking. They weren't just training for hoplite battles on plains, they were training for every possible scenario. Mountain warfare against hill tribes, amphibious operations along the coast, urban combat in cities with steep streets, pursuit of enemies through any terrain. Their conditioning created generalists who could fight effectively anywhere, while other armies created specialists who excelled in specific conditions but faltered when circumstances changed. Here's a historical fact that validates this approach. Spartan forces operated successfully in environments ranging from coastal marshes to mountain passes to urban terrain, while armies like the Theban Sacred Band, legendary in their own right, struggled when fighting outside their preferred terrain. Versatility, built through exposure to every possible training environment, gave Spartans strategic flexibility that translated into tactical advantages. The caves appear gradually as you round a rocky outcropping, dark openings in the mountainside like mouths waiting to swallow whatever ventures inside. Steam rises from some of the entrances, suggesting underground water sources or geothermal activity that creates slight temperature differentials. The largest cave entrance is perhaps 12 feet wide and 8 feet tall, more than adequate for warriors to enter in formation, but the darkness beyond reveals nothing about what lies deeper. Lysander pauses at the entrance, allowing your eyes to adjust to the transition from bright winter sunlight to the dimness of the cave interior. "Here you will learn what it means to create warmth where none exists," he says, his voice taking on a quality that's almost reverent. "Fire is a gift, but dependence on external warmth creates weakness. You will learn to be your own fires." The statement sounds mystical, almost supernatural, but you'll soon learn it's grounded in practical physiology. The human body can generate remarkable amounts of heat through specific techniques, muscle tensing patterns, breathing methods, circulation optimization, and the caves provide the perfect laboratory for mastering these skills because the environment is harsh enough to demand success, but controlled enough to prevent death from failure. You enter the cave in single file, each warrior's hand resting lightly on the shoulder of the man ahead for guidance, as your eyes struggle to adapt to the darkness. The temperature inside is noticeably different from outside. Not warmer exactly, but different in quality. The air is still rather than moving, humid rather than dry, carrying scents of stone and mineral water, and something organic you can't quite identify. The cave floor is uneven limestone, carved by ancient water flows into ripples and channels that make walking treacherous. Your bare feet feel every texture, smooth stone polished by vanished rivers, rough patches where crystals have formed, wet areas where condensation drips from the ceiling. Each step requires attention and balance, especially in the darkness where your eyes provide minimal information and your feet must do most of the sensing. As you move deeper into the cave system, following Lysander's confident lead, the darkness becomes almost absolute. The cave entrance, visible behind you as a grey semicircle of lesser darkness, provides barely enough light to distinguish shapes from shadows. You begin to understand why this training was so valued. Warriors who could function effectively in near total darkness gained enormous advantages in night operations or battles that extended past sunset. You might not realise that human eyes can adapt to incredibly low light levels if given sufficient time, producing night vision far better than most people experience in their artificially lit modern lives. The rod cells in your retinas, responsible for low light vision, become increasingly sensitive as minutes pass in darkness. The Spartans discovered this through necessity, learning that warriors who spent time in caves developed superior night vision that persisted for hours after emerging. The column stops, and you hear Lysander's voice emerging from the darkness ahead. Each pair will claim a chamber. You have until sunset to prepare your shelter, fire, sleeping arrangements, everything needed for a night that will test whether you've learned anything today. You may gather materials from within the cave system and the immediate area outside. Any warrior whose fire goes out during the night will be considered dead and will train accordingly tomorrow. The threat is clear. Train accordingly means punishment exercises that will make today's conditioning feel gentle. But more than the threat, there's the pride factor. No warrior wants to be the one who failed while his brother succeeded. The social pressure is enormous and entirely intentional. Cleomenes is your partner here, which brings both relief and pressure. Relief because you've trained together all day and understand each other's rhythms and capabilities. Pressure because he's watching you just as you're watching him, and neither wants to be the weak link that dooms the partnership. "We need to explore our chamber first," Cleomenes whispers, his voice barely audible even though he's right beside you. "Understand the space before we commit to any fire location." It's sound thinking and you nod agreement, even though he probably can't see the gesture in the darkness. Together you begin exploring the chamber Lysander has assigned, a roughly circular space maybe 15 feet in diameter, with a ceiling height that varies from barely tall enough to stand to perhaps 10 feet at the centre. Your hands trace the walls while your feet map the floor, building a mental image of the space through touch and echo. Here's a historical fact about Spartan night training. They conducted regular exercises in absolute darkness, developing spatial awareness and non-visual navigation skills that made them devastating in night combat. During the siege of Pylos in 425 BCE, Spartan forces conducted night operations that confused Athenian defenders who couldn't understand how attackers were moving so confidently in darkness. The floor of your chamber slopes slightly toward one corner where water has pooled. Not ideal for sleeping, but perfect for drinking water, solving one survival need immediately. The walls are relatively smooth limestone with occasional ledges that could serve as shelves or supports. Most importantly, you discover a natural chimney effect near one wall, where air currents suggest a connection to the outside, critical for fire safety, as smoke accumulation in an enclosed space can kill as surely as cold. "Fire location there," you say quietly, pointing even though Cleomenes can't see the gesture, then guiding his hand to the spot you mean. "The draft will carry smoke out, and we can position sleeping areas to capture heat without getting smoked." "Good," he acknowledges. "I'll gather combustibles from outside while you prepare the firebed and collect tinder inside. Meet back here when we've got materials." The division of labour is automatic, requiring no discussion of who does what. You simply fall into efficient patterns developed through months of training together. This is another layer of the Brotherhood conditioning. Partners who can organise themselves without wasted discussion, who trust each other to complete assigned tasks without supervision, who work toward common goals with minimal friction. You begin exploring the deeper cave passages in search of tinder and kindling, your hands extended in the darkness, feet moving carefully to avoid invisible obstacles. The search teaches you things about the cave ecosystem that surprise you. Dried moss in protected crevices, desiccated bat guano that will burn despite smelling terrible ancient wood fragments, washed in by the long-ago floods, and left in high crevices to dry for decades. Fringe fact: some ancient sources describe Spartan warriors eating cave-dwelling creatures during extreme survival training: bats, blind fish, insects. While this might be exaggerated, it reflects the reality that Spartan training often included foraging exercises designed at Dunsand to teach warriors to find sustenance in any environment. The distinction between training and survival was often deliberately blurred. As you gather materials, you become aware of sounds you've been too focused to notice. Water dripping somewhere in the darkness creating irregular percussion. Air moving through stone passages with sounds like distant breathing. Small scurrying noises that suggest the cave isn't uninhabited. Each sound provides information about the cave system's structure and contents, teaching you to build mental maps through audio cues. By the time you return to your chamber, arms loaded with carefully gathered combustibles, Cleomenes has already returned with his own collection. Dried grass and small branches from outside, including some pine pitch that will burn hot and provide excellent fire-starting material. Together you arrange the materials in the optimal location you identified earlier, building the fire foundation with the careful attention that the task deserves. Fire-making in winter conditions with primitive tools is far more challenging than most people imagine. The materials must be absolutely dry, arranged in precise configurations that allow airflow while maintaining proximity for flame spread, and ignited with methods that seem almost impossibly difficult to anyone accustomed to matches or lighters. You might wonder what fire-starting method the Spartans used. The bow drill technique, a wooden spindle rotated rapidly against a wooden base to create friction heat, was common throughout the ancient world and would have been familiar to any Spartan warrior. But creating embers in cold, humid conditions requires specific wood selections, precise technique, and patience that exhausted cold warriors often struggle to maintain. The bow drill consists of several components: a spindle of straight, dry wood that rotates against a fireboard of slightly softer wood, creating friction and heat. A bow made from a flexible branch and string provides the mechanical advantage to rotate the spindle rapidly. A bearing block held in your hand stabilizes the top of the spindle while allowing it to rotate. And the entire apparatus requires materials, construction skill, and physical technique that take years to master. Cleomenes begins constructing the bow while you prepare the fireboard and spindle, selecting wood pieces from the cave's stored detritus, and testing them for the right combination of hardness and dryness. The spindle must be perfectly straight and smooth. Any wobble will waste energy and prevent the sustained friction needed to create embers. The fireboard must be stable and positioned to allow the ember to drop into waiting. Tinder. Ready, Cleomenes announces, and you position the apparatus while he takes the bow. The technique requires rhythm, pressure, and endurance, sawing the bow back and forth to spin the spindle while maintaining downward pressure through the bearing block, creating friction between spindle and fireboard that gradually chars the wood and eventually produces glowing embers. The sound of the bow drill fills your chamber, a rhythmic squeaking punctuated by Cleomenes' controlled breathing. Minutes pass and you can smell wood burning even though you can't see flames. The scent is acrid and promising, the smell of friction heat doing its work. You watch the fireboard area where embers should form, waiting for the telltale glow that signals success. Here's a historical fact about Spartan resourcefulness. They were trained to create fire under any conditions, including rain, snow, and high wind. This skill was considered so fundamental that warriors who couldn't produce fire independently were subject to harsh discipline. The ability to create warmth and cook food without depending on others or carried supplies was viewed as essential to survival and independence. A faint glow appears in the charred wood dust accumulating beneath the spindle. Success. Cleomenes maintains his bow rhythm while you carefully transfer the glowing ember to the tinder bundle you've prepared. The ember is tiny, barely visible, but it contains the potential for warmth and light and survival. You lift the tinder bundle and blow on it gently, providing oxygen to feed the combustion, while being careful not to blow so hard you scatter the ember. The tinder begins to smoke, thin wisps at first, then thicker as the ember spreads through the dried moss and grass. The smell is organic and promising, civilization emerging from wilderness through the application of skill and will. You blow again, more confidently now, and suddenly flame appears, small and fragile at first, but growing as it consumes the tinder. The moment of flame feels almost magical despite being purely physical and chemical. Light blooms in the darkness of your chamber, driving back shadows and revealing the space you've been navigating blind. Heat begins radiating from your cupped hands, warming your sis even though the flame is tiny. And you feel a sense of accomplishment that seems disproportionate to the small fire, but isn't. You've created warmth where none existed, conquered cold through skill and knowledge. You transfer the burning tinder to the prepared firebed, adding progressively larger materials as the flames grow stronger. Small twigs first, then finger-thick branches, then larger pieces as the fire becomes self-sustaining. The fire grows from flame to blaze, filling your chamber with dancing light and blessed warmth that feels more luxurious than any modern heating system. The firelight reveals your chamber in detail for the first time. Walls streaked with mineral deposits that create abstract patterns, a ceiling irregular with formations where ancient water carved the stone, your partner's face showing relief and satisfaction mirroring your own feelings. The fire transforms the space from hostile cave to primitive shelter, from endurance trial to survivable environment. You might notice how fire changes everything, not just physically providing warmth and light, but psychologically transforming the cave from threatening to protective. This psychological dimension was something Spartans understood intuitively. Warriors who could create their own comfort through skill and effort developed different relationships with hardship than warriors who depended on external provisions. With fire established, the next challenge becomes managing it through the night, maintaining adequate heat while conserving limited fuel in an underground environment where smoke accumulation could become lethal if not properly managed. This is where the training moves from basic survival to sophisticated environmental engineering. Cleomenes begins arranging sleeping positions while you organize the fuel supply, segregating materials by burn rate and heat output, fast-burning pine pitch for quick heat when needed, slower-burning oak for sustained warmth through the night, and strategic reserves in case the fire needs rebuilding from embers. Every piece of wood is accounted for, positioned for easy access in darkness, arranged to stay dry from cave moisture. The sleeping arrangement requires careful thought, close enough to the fire to benefit from radiant heat, far enough to avoid smoke inhalation or spark risks, positioned to allow easy access for nighttime fire tending without disrupting sleep positions. The limestone floor is hard and cold despite the fire, so you gather dried moss and grass to create minimal padding between bodies and stone. Sleep in shifts, Cleomenes suggests. One tends fire while the other rests, 2-hour rotation so neither gets too exhausted. It's sound tactical thinking, the kind of approach that would be used on sentry duty during the campaigns. But more than that, it demonstrates the partnership principle that's been reinforced all day. Warriors who support each other through the night will support each other in battle. You might wonder whether this sleep shift system actually provides adequate rest. Modern sleep science would say no. Interrupted sleep prevents the deep REM cycles needed for true restoration. But the Spartans weren't training for optimal rest. They were training for combat conditions where true rest is impossible. Warriors who learned to function on interrupted, inadequate sleep gained advantages over enemies who required comfortable, uninterrupted rest to maintain effectiveness. The first watch falls to you by mutual agreement, leaving Cleomenes to sleep first while you maintain the fire and guard against the cold's return. You sit near the flames, close enough to feel significant heat, but positioned to avoid the smoke that rises toward the natural chimney you identified earlier. The firelight creates a bubble of illumination that extends perhaps 8 or 10 feet before surrendering to darkness that seems even more absolute by contrast. The cave sounds become more apparent in the quiet, dripping water keeping a regular time, occasional pops from the fire as pitch pockets ignite, and from deeper in the cave system sounds you can't quite identify that might be wind or water, or something alive moving through stone passages. Each sound seems amplified by the darkness and the limestone walls that reflect and distort audio in ways that make distance and direction difficult to judge. As you sit watching flames dance and shift, you begin to understand something that Lysander mentioned earlier about being your own fire. The external fire provides warmth, yes, but the more important fire is the one inside, the metabolic furnace that burns calories to generate heat, the disciplined mind that maintains focus despite fatigue. the warrior spirit that refuses to surrender to cold or darkness or hardship. Here's a historical fact that reveals the depth of Spartan fire philosophy. They believed that every warrior contained an internal flame that training either strengthened or extinguished. The Greek word they used, thymos, meant something like spirited courage or fighting heart, and it was visualized as fire within the chest. Physical fire training in caves wasn't just about practical survival, it was about strengthening the thymos through mastery of elemental forces. The fire needs feeding every 20 or 30 minutes, requiring attention that prevents true rest even during your awake shift. You learn to read the flames. Blue indicates clean, hot combustion. Yellow suggests less efficient burning. Excessive smoke means insufficient airflow or wet materials. Each observation teaches you something about fire management that will serve you on future campaigns where fire might mean survival. The hours pass slowly, marked by the gradual consumption of fuel supplies and the subtle changes in the fire's character as different materials burn. You find yourself entering a meditative state, not quite awake but not sleeping, a twilight consciousness where time becomes fluid and thoughts drift without conscious direction. This state is strangely restful despite the lack of actual sleep, providing mental recovery even while your body remains alert. Around the time you judge to be midnight, impossible to know precisely without seeing stars or having timekeeping devices, you wake Cleomenes for the watch change. He rises instantly, years of training eliminating the grogginess that would afflict ordinary men woken in the night. "Status?" he asks quietly. "Fire is strong, fuel is adequate. No issues with you rapport with the concise efficiency that military communication demands. No wasted words, just essential information clearly delivered. Fringe fact. Some ancient sources claim Spartan warriors could communicate complex tactical information through fire signals visible for miles, using variations in smoke color, flame size, and timings to convey messages. While this might be exaggerated, it reflects the sophisticated understanding of fire behavior that their training developed. Modern military forces use similar concepts in signal fires, validating the basic principle. You settle into the sleeping position Cleomenes vacated, still warm from his body heat, close enough to the fire to feel its warmth, but positioned to avoid direct smoke. The limestone floor is hard beneath the minimal padding, and the cold from the stone seeps upward despite the fire's heat. But you've spent the day learning to find rest in discomfort, and sleep comes surprisingly quickly despite the harsh conditions. Your dreams are vivid, fragmented images of fire and water, of mountains and rivers, of brothers in arms facing challenges that blur the line between training and battle. The intensity suggests REM sleep, despite the interrupted conditions, your brain processing the day's extreme experiences into memory and skill. When Cleomenes wakes you for your second watch shift, you feel more rested than seems reasonable given the circumstances. The second watch passes similarly to the first, maintaining fire and awareness through hours that stretch toward dawn. But you notice something interesting. The cold seems less severe than it did hours ago, despite the temperature probably dropping as night deepens. Your body has adapted further, finding efficiency in heat generation and conservation that makes the same temperature feel less challenging. This is the essence of conditioning, not changing the environment but changing your relationship with it. The cave is still cold, the limestone still hard, the darkness still absolute beyond the firelight. But you've become someone who can be comfortable within these conditions, someone who generates their own warmth rather than depending on external sources. You might wonder how this connects to the broader philosophy of Spartan warrior culture. The answer lies in the concept of autarkeia, self-sufficiency and independence from external needs. Warriors who could be comfortable in caves with minimal resources became warriors who could campaign indefinitely, without elaborate supply lines. Empires that depended on comfort required logistics trains that limited their strategic flexibility. Sparta created warriors who could march with minimal supplies and fight effectively under conditions that would cripple logistics-dependent armies. Dawn must be approaching when you notice subtle changes, a slight lessening of the absolute darkness in the cave entrance visible from your chamber, a shift in the temperature that suggests the outside world beginning its transition from night to day. You wake Cleomenes even though his shift isn't technically due, knowing that Lysander will expect all warriors assembled at dawn. Together you perform morning tasks, banking the fire to conserve what fuel remains, stretching cold-stiffened muscles, chairing the water from the pool in your chamber's corner. The routine is simple but important, establishing patterns that will serve you on future campaigns where morning efficiency determines whether armies are ready for battle when opportunity strikes. You emerge from the cave into a dawn that feels almost painfully bright after the night spent in firelit darkness. The sun hasn't cleared the eastern mountains yet, but the sky is lightening with the pale glow that precedes sunrise. The temperature has dropped significantly during the night, probably to the mid-20s Fahrenheit, and frost covers everything in crystalline layers that sparkle in the growing light. The other warriors are emerging from their respective chambers, moving with the stiffness that comes from spending a night on stone floors in cold conditions. But every pair successfully maintained their fires. No smoke signals of disaster, no warriors suffering from hypothermia or smoke inhalation, no failures that would require the punishment training Lysander threatened. You might notice the sense of collective accomplishment that pervades the group. 30 warriors, 15 Sarahs, all successfully maintained through a night that could have killed unprepared men. This shared success builds the Brotherhood bonds even more than shared suffering did. Success earned together creates confidence that will be crucial when battles hang in the balance. Lysander appears from a chamber deeper in the cave system, looking no different than he did yesterday. Apparently he spent the night in conditions even harsher than those assigned to trainees, or perhaps he didn't sleep at all, maintaining watch over the entire group. Either possibility reinforces his authority and the respect he commands. "You have proven you can survive the night," he announces, his voice carrying clearly in the still morning air. "But survival is not enough. Today you learn to thrive in conditions that break ordinary men." The phrasing is telling. Survival is the minimum standard, thriving is the goal. This distinction separates Spartan training from mere hardship. Many people can survive difficult conditions through sheer will and endurance. Few can learn to actually perform better, to become more capable, to thrive when circumstances become more challenging. Here's a historical fact that demonstrates this principle in action. During the Corinthian War, 395-397 BCE, Spartan forces operated effectively during a winter that was harsh even by Laconian standards, while their Athenian and Theban opponents struggled with frostbite, disease, and low morale. The difference wasn't courage or determination, it was preparation that taught one army to thrive in conditions that forced others merely to survive. The morning training begins with a run-throughs, the mountains following trails that climb higher into terrain where snow lies deeper and the air grows thinner. Your legs are stiff from yesterday's training and sleeping on stone, but the movement brings warmth and loosened tight muscles. The group moves in formation despite the challenging terrain, maintaining cohesion that would be impossible for less disciplined units. The route takes you past landmarks that reveal this training ground's long history. Carved stones marking the boundaries of different training zones, worn paths showing where thousands of warriors have passed before you, and occasional offerings left at natural shrines where tradition holds that gods watch over Spartan training. These glimpses into tradition remind you that you're not just training individually, you're joining a continuum of warriors stretching back generations. As the sun finally crests the eastern peaks, its light transforms the landscape from grey monotone to brilliant whites and blues. The snow sparkles like scattered diamonds, the sky shifts from pale grey to deep azure, and the shadows cast by the oblique winter sunlight create textures and depths invisible during summer's overhead illumination. The beauty is striking, but you've learnt not to let aesthetics distract from function. Beautiful landscapes can kill unprepared travellers just as surely as ugly ones. The snow that sparkles so beautifully can conceal the deadly crevasses or unstable slopes. The clear sky that looks so peaceful can turn to storm within hours. Warrior awareness means seeing both the beauty and the danger, appreciating the former while respecting the latter. You might notice how this connects to the Greek philosophical concept of kalos kagathos, the beautiful and the good unified. Spartan saw no contradiction between appreciating beauty and preparing for war, between artistic sensitivity and martial effectiveness. The same warrior who could compose poetry could also kill efficiently in battle. This integration of seemingly opposite qualities created surprisingly sophisticated individuals. The run culminates at a high plateau where the view extends for miles in all directions, the Laconian Valley spread below, the Eurotas River, a silver thread through winter-brown fields, and in the far distance hints of the sea that connected Sparta to the wider Mediterranean world. The view is strategic as well as beautiful, showing the territory that Sparta controlled and the natural defences that made their homeland difficult to invade. Lysander allows a brief pause for warriors to catch their breath and observe the landscape. "This is what you defend," he says simply, gesturing toward the valley. Not abstract concepts of honour or glory, but this land and the people who depend on warriors strong enough to protect them. The statement grounds the training in concrete purpose. It's not about becoming superhuman for its own sake. It's about developing capabilities needed to fulfill responsibilities to community and country. This sense of purpose beyond self-interest is another layer of conditioning, creating warriors who fight for reasons larger than personal survival or gain. Here's a historical fact about Spartan defensive strategy. Their homeland was considered nearly impregnable due to mountain barriers and limited passes that could be defended by small forces. This geography allowed them to maintain a relatively small citizen warrior class, maybe 8,000 to 10,000 at peak, while controlling a much larger subject population. The winter training that seemed excessive for flatland hoplite battles was essential for mountain defense scenarios. The return journey follows a different route, teaching you that there are always multiple paths to any destination, and that warriors must be capable of navigating unfamiliar terrain. The new path includes challenges the morning route lacked: a stream crossing over ice-slicked stones, a steep descent requiring controlled slides and careful braking, and a section through dense thorn bushes that scratch exposed skin, but must be traversed because detours waste time. Each challenge teaches specific skills while reinforcing general principles. The stream crossing teaches balance and risk assessment. The steep descent teaches controlled falling and body position for sliding. The thorn bushes teach pain tolerance and the ability to maintain focus despite minor injuries. No time is wasted, no suffering without purpose. Every element of the route serves training objectives. As you approach the cave system from this new direction, you notice features invisible from yesterday's approach: a secondary entrance that could serve as emergency exit, a sheltered area where supplies could be cached, and terrain features that would favour defenders in combat scenarios. This observation practice, constantly scanning environments for tactical information, becomes automatic through training, creating warriors who gather intelligence without conscious effort. The sun reaches its winter peak, maybe 30 degrees above the southern horizon, when Lysander finally announces the meal break. You've been training for nearly 24 hours with no food, surviving on water and will and the body's stored reserves. The hunger is profound, a gnawing emptiness that makes your stomach clench and your thoughts occasionally drift toward fantasies of bread and meat and warmth. But here's something you might not expect. The hunger has also brought a kind of clarity. Your mind feels sharp despite the physical depletion, focused on immediate reality in ways that well-fed comfort rarely produces. This is another aspect of Spartan conditioning, learning that hunger doesn't equal inability, that the human body can perform remarkably well on minimal nutrition if trained to do so. The meal is communal, all 30 warriors gathering in a large cave chamber, where supplies have been pre-positioned by helot servants. This food is basic: barley bread so coarse it's almost grey, hard cheese made from sheep's milk, olives preserved in brine, and the infamous black broth that forms the centerpiece of Spartan warrior diet. You might wonder about this black broth, melos zomos in Greek, which ancient sources describe as so unpalatable that visiting dignitaries often couldn't finish a bowl. The recipe is simple but forbidding: boiled pork blood, vinegar and salt, creating a liquid that provides protein and iron but absolutely no pleasure. The taste is metallic and sharp, the texture thick and unsettling, the overall experience deliberately unpleasant. Here's a historical fact about Spartan nutritional philosophy. They believed that pleasure in eating created dependence and weakness, while functional eating created strength and independence. The black broth wasn't just nutritionally efficient, it was psychologically conditioning warriors to view food as fuel rather than entertainment. Modern military rations follow similar logic, prioritizing nutrition and shelf stability over taste. The serving size is calculated, enough to prevent malnutrition, but not enough to feel fully satisfied. You receive perhaps a cup and a half of the broth, 2 small loaves of the barley bread, a handful of olives, and a piece of cheese the size of your palm. By modern standards, it's starvation rations, maybe 1,500 to 1,800 calories total. By Spartan standards, during winter training, it's adequate fuel for warriors whose bodies have adapted to function efficiently on minimal input. The eating process is surprisingly ritualized despite the simple food. Warriors sit in assigned positions reflecting their training groups and hierarchies. Food is distributed by designated servers in precise portions. Conversation is permitted but minimal. Brief exchanges about training observations or tactical questions, never personal complaints or criticisms of the food. The discipline extends to eating pace. You're trained to eat slowly despite hunger, chewing thoroughly to extract maximum nutrition and prevent the digestive issues that come from gulping food after extended fasting. Each bite of bread requires effort to chew due to its coarse texture, forcing slow consumption. The black broth must be sipped rather than gulped, both because its strong taste becomes overwhelming in large quantities and because rapid consumption can cause nausea. As you eat, you notice how the food tastes after a day of cold and exertion. The bread, which would seem barely palatable under normal circumstances, tastes almost sweet, your depleted body craving the carbohydrates so intensely that even coarse grain becomes desirable. The cheese provides fats and protein your system desperately needs, creating satisfaction disproportionate to the small quantity. Even the black broth, metallic and harsh, provides warmth and sustenance that makes it welcome despite its unpleasant flavour. Fringe. Fact. Some ancient sources claim that Spartan warriors could distinguish individual ingredients in the black broth by taste alone, identifying which pigs the blood came from and which region produced the salt. This is almost certainly exaggerated, but it reflects the attention to detail and sensory awareness that Spartan training emphasized. Warriors who could detect subtle variations in food could detect subtle changes in any environment. The communal eating serves social purposes beyond nutrition. You observe the hierarchy, older warriors being served first, training officers receiving slightly larger portions, younger warriors waiting patiently for their turn. The system reinforces social order while demonstrating the meritocracy that characterizes Spartan military culture. Positions are earned through proven capability, not birthright or wealth. You might notice the conversations happening around you, quiet exchanges where more experienced warriors share knowledge with younger ones. An older soldier describes how to identify edible plants in winter when most vegetation is dead. Another explains techniques for finding water in frozen landscapes. A third shares observations about predicting weather changes from cloud patterns and animal behavior. This informal knowledge transfer is another layer of the training system. Formal instruction from trainers like Lysander provides the foundation, but peer learning among warriors creates the depth and nuance that comes from collective experience. Every warrior eventually becomes a teacher, passing knowledge to the next generation and thereby deepening his own understanding through the act of teaching. The meal concludes after perhaps 20 minutes, enough time to eat the modest portions without rushing, not enough time to become comfortable and reluctant to return to training. Lysander rises, signalling that the break has ended, and 30 warriors rise with him in synchronized movement that requires no verbal command. Here's a historical fact about Spartan meal discipline. During campaigns, they maintained the same controlled eating practices regardless of food availability. When supplies were abundant, portions remained modest to prevent sluggishness. When supplies were scarce, the familiar discipline prevented the panic and disorder that often plagued other armies facing shortage. This consistency created psychological stability that was as important as the physical conditioning. The afternoon training focuses on combat application, Lysander announces. You have learned to endure cold, to function on minimal food, to maintain fire, and to navigate darkness. Now you learn why these skills matter, how they translate to battlefield advantage. The phrasing shifts the training's context from survival exercise to military preparation. Everything you've endured over the past day and night suddenly connects to concrete tactical purposes. The cold tolerance allows fighting in winter campaigns. The hunger tolerance allows functioning when supply lines are cut. The fire skills allow camping in hostile territory. The darkness navigation allows night operations. The connections seem obvious in retrospect, but they needed to be earned through experience before they could be understood. Warriors who simply heard lectures about why cold tolerance matters wouldn't develop the embodied knowledge that comes from discovering it through direct experience. This is the genius of experiential learning. Lessons earned through hardship last forever, while lessons merely heard are quickly forgotten. The afternoon training begins with weapons work, but not the practice drills you might expect. Instead, Lysander distributes actual combat equipment: bronze-tipped spears weighing perhaps 5 pounds, shields of wood and bronze weighing 15 to 18 pounds, and short swords for close combat. The weight is significant, especially for bodies that have been training for over a day with minimal food. In summer, these feel manageable, Lysander explains, hefting a shield that looks tiny in his scarred hands. Your muscles are warm, your hands have full sensitivity, your body moves with easy efficiency. But in winter campaign, everything changes. Cold makes bronze feel heavier, numbness makes grips uncertain. Frozen muscles move sluggishly. Today you learn to fight effectively despite these challenges. The honesty is valuable. He's not claiming that cold doesn't impair performance, just that the impairment can be compensated through technique and conditioning. This realistic approach builds trust. Warriors know they're being prepared for actual conditions rather than idealized scenarios. The first exercise involves simply holding the shield in defensive position for extended periods while standing in snow. This sounds simple until you experience the reality. The shield's weight, manageable for minutes, becomes crushing after 10 or 15 minutes. Your arm muscles begin to burn and tremble. The cold makes the bronze rim feel like ice against your forearm. Your shoulder aches from the sustained tension. But here's where the training becomes sophisticated. You're taught to use small muscle adjustments to shift load between different muscle groups, preventing any single area from becoming completely exhausted. Rock the shield slightly forward to engage shoulder muscles, then back to transfer load to biceps, then adjust position to use core muscles for support. These micro-adjustments allow sustained performance that would be impossible with static positioning. You might recognize this as similar to techniques modern bodybuilders use for time under tension training, extended holds that build muscular endurance. These Spartans discovered the same principles through trial and error, learning that warriors who could maintain shields through extended battles outlasted enemies who relied on pure strength without endurance. The exercise continues until your entire upper body screams for relief, until the shield feels like it weighs 50 pounds instead of 18, until every second seems to stretch into minutes. But around you, 29 other warriors maintain their positions with the same trembling determination, and their endurance fuels yours. When Lysander finally calls the hold, 30 shields drop simultaneously, and 30 arms shake with released tension. Here's a historical fact about Spartan shield drill. They trained to maintain defensive formations for hours without breaking, creating phalanxes that enemies literally couldn't penetrate because the shields never wavered. During the Battle of Mantinea in 418 BCE, Spartan forces maintained perfect shield walls through extended combat that shattered enemy formations attempting to match their cohesion. The next drill combines shield work with footwork on icy surfaces, teaching you to maintain defensive positioning while moving across terrain that wants to topple you. The challenge is immense. Every step risks slipping, but dropping the shield or breaking formation creates vulnerabilities that enemies would exploit instantly. You learn to test each footfall before committing weight, to use the shield itself as counterbalance, to trust your conditioned feet to find purchase where ordinary soldiers would fall. The complexity increases as Lysander introduces offensive actions, spear thrusts from behind shield walls, coordinated advances where 30 warriors move as one organism, and the most challenging drill of all, the Athismos, the sustained pushing contest where opposing phalanxes literally shove against each other with shields, each side trying to break the other's formation through pure pressure. In summer conditions, the Athismos is exhausting but manageable. Muscles generate heat that keeps them flexible, Sweat provides cooling that prevents overheating, and stable footing allows effective force transfer. In winter, everything inverts. Muscles stiffen from cold, making them less powerful. The ground becomes slick, reducing traction, and the sustained exertion in cold air creates breathing challenges as you try to warm frigid air before it reaches your lungs. Fringe fact: some ancient sources describe Spartan warriors practicing Athysmos drills while standing in ice water, creating conditions so brutal that actual combat felt easy by comparison. While this specific detail might be exaggerated, it reflects the authentic Spartan principle of making training harder than battle. The Athysmos drill divides your 30-man group into two 15-man phalanxes that will push against each other in sustained contest. You're positioned in the second rank, which means your shield presses against the back of the warrior ahead of you, transferring your pushing force through his shield into the enemy formation. The physics are brutal. You're not just supporting your own weight and equipment, you're adding force to amplify the pressure on the enemy. "Set!" Lysander commands, and both phalanxes assume pushing positions, feet planted wide, shoulders braced against shields, heads down to protect against overhead strikes. The formation is so tight you can feel the breathing of the warrior ahead of you, smell the sweat and leather and bronze of massed warriors preparing for contest. Push! The command releases both formations into motion, and the collision is enormous. The shield wall ahead of you absorbs the impact and transmits it backward through the formation, nearly knocking you off balance despite your planted stance. You recover and add your weight to the push, driving forward against resistance that feels like trying to move a mountain. The contest becomes a trial of collective will. Which formation can maintain pressure longer? Which warriors can continue pushing when muscles scream and lungs burn, and cold makes everything harder? You focus on technique rather than pure strength, using leg drive to generate force, keeping your core engaged to transfer power efficiently, coordinating your breathing with the rhythm of push and recovery. You might notice how this exercise builds the ultimate team cohesion. Individual strength matters far less than collective coordination. A formation where every warrior pushes in perfect synchronization will defeat a formation of stronger individuals who push independently. The lesson is profound. Unity creates capabilities that individual excellence cannot match. The Athysmos continues for what feels like hours, but is probably only 5 or 10 minutes before Lysander calls a halt. Both formations are exhausted, warriors breathing hard and steaming in the cold air. But the exercise accomplished its purpose. You now understand viscerally how winter conditions affect combat, and how technique can compensate for environmental challenges. Here's a historical fact that demonstrates Spartan superiority in sustained combat. During the Peloponnesian War, Athenian commanders specifically tried to avoid prolonged engagements with Spartan forces, knowing that Spartans trained for exactly these grinding contests, while Athenians trained for quick, decisive battles. The strategic implications were enormous. Armies that could control the tempo of combat had significant advantages. As warriors nursed sore muscles and minor injuries from the afternoon's combat training, Lysander transitions to teaching that seems incongruous with the brutal conditioning, the arts of healing and body maintenance that allow warriors to sustain peak performance through extended campaigns. A warrior who doesn't understand his body is a weapon that breaks when most needed, he explains, gathering the group in a circle. The Athenians hire physicians to tend their wounded. We teach every warrior to be his own physician. The statement reflects Spartan self-sufficiency philosophy. Dependence on specialists creates vulnerabilities that enemies can exploit. Warriors who can treat their own injuries remain combat effective even when separated from support personnel. The first lesson involves treatment of cold injuries, recognizing the stages of frostbite, knowing which injuries can be treated in the field versus which require evacuation, understanding the counterintuitive principle that rapid rewarming can cause more damage than the initial cold exposure. Lysander demonstrates on volunteers, showing how to assess capillary refill in cold-numbed fingers, how to distinguish between superficial and deep tissue freezing, how to protect frozen tissue during the slow rewarming that prevents permanent damage. You might be surprised by how sophisticated this knowledge is. Modern wilderness medicine teaches essentially the same principles that Lysander demonstrates: gradual rewarming, protection of frozen tissue from trauma, recognition that frostbite often accompanies hypothermia requiring different treatments. The Spartans developed this knowledge empirically, through generations of warriors experiencing cold injuries and observing what treatments worked. The second lesson covers muscle and tendon injuries, the strains, tears and inflammations that sideline warriors more often than combat wounds. You learn to distinguish between injuries that require rest and injuries that can be worked through, between pain that signals damage and pain that signals adaptation. The knowledge is practical and immediately applicable to the sore muscles and minor strains everyone has accumulated during training. The treatments are simple but effective: massage techniques that increase blood flow to injured tissues, stretching protocols that maintain flexibility while avoiding further damage, and the strategic application of heat and cold to manage inflammation. Each technique is demonstrated and practiced, turning theoretical knowledge into embodied skill. Here's a historical fact about Spartan medical knowledge. Despite having no formal physicians in their armies, Spartan forces suffered lower rates of infection and disability from campaign injuries than other Greek armies. This wasn't due to superior luck. It was the result of every warrior possessing basic medical knowledge and taking personal responsibility for health maintenance. Lysander also teaches prevention strategies: how to maintain foot health during long marches, how to avoid the shoulder injuries that plague spearmen, how to manage the repetitive stress that accumulates from constant shield work. The focus is pragmatic rather than theoretical, concerned with keeping warriors functional rather than pursuing complete healing. Pain is information, Lysander explains, pressing on a volunteer's shoulder to demonstrate a common inflammation point. It tells you about tissue damage, about movements to avoid, about your body's healing progress. Warriors who ignore pain become cripples. Warriors who are controlled by pain become cowards. You must find the balance, acknowledge pain while refusing to be limited by it. The philosophy embedded in this teaching reveals the Spartan relationship with suffering. Pain isn't glorified or pursued for its own sake, but neither is it avoided at all costs. Instead, pain is treated as neutral information requiring intelligent response. This balanced approach creates warriors who can push through genuine hardship without falling into either denial or self-pity. Fringe fact: some ancient sources claim that Spartan warriors could perform a field surgery on themselves, removing arrowheads and stitching wounds without assistance. While this might be exaggerated, it reflects the reality that Spartan medical training was far more extensive than other Greek cities provided to their soldiers. Archaeological evidence from battlefield sites shows Spartan casualties with survival rates suggesting sophisticated medical care. The teaching extends to nutritional knowledge, how to identify foods that provide quick energy versus sustained fuel, how to forage for winter edibles when supplies run low, how to judge the safety of unfamiliar water sources. Each lesson is grounded in practical scenarios warriors might face during campaigns. You learn that pine bark stripped from certain trees and boiled provides vitamin C that prevents scurvy during extended winter campaigns. You learn that snow should never be eaten directly for hydration because the energy required to melt it internally costs more than the water provides. You learn to identify animal tracks that might lead to food sources and distinguish poisonous plants from edible ones, even when winter has stripped identifying features. The knowledge accumulates into a comprehensive survival curriculum that transforms warriors from dependents requiring constant logistical support into self-sufficient operators who can sustain themselves in hostile environments. This self-sufficiency was a force multiplier. Spartan armies could campaign in territories where other armies would starve, could continue operations when supply lines were cut, could split into small units for guerrilla operations that required each group to be independently sustainable. You might notice how this integrates with the day's earlier training. The cold tolerance allows operation in harsh climates. The hunger tolerance allows function on limited rations. The medical knowledge allows continued operation despite minor injuries. Each element supports the others, creating warriors whose capabilities are multiplicative rather than merely additive. As the sun begins its descent toward the western peaks, painting the snow in shades of orange and gold, Lysander concludes the medical instruction. "Tonight you return to the caves," he announces. "But tonight you apply everything learned. No instructions, no supervision. Each pair will manage fire, shelter, food preparation, and security independently. Tomorrow we evaluate whether you've truly learned or merely endured, The third challenge is clear: transition from following instructions to independent application. This is the ultimate test of whether training has created capable warriors or merely obedient followers. The Spartan system valued initiative and judgment as highly as discipline and obedience, seeking warriors who could function effectively without constant supervision. The second night in the caves begins with confidence born from experience. You and Cleomenes know your chamber, understand its airflows and water sources, have proven you can maintain fire through darkness. But Lysander's removal of supervision adds psychological pressure. Success or failure is now entirely on your shoulders, with no trainer to correct errors before they become disasters. The fire building proceeds more efficiently than the previous night. You've learned which materials burn best, how to arrange them for optimal heat and minimal smoke, where to position the fire for maximum utility. What took nearly an hour yesterday requires perhaps 20 minutes tonight, demonstrating the rapid skill acquisition that comes from immediate, consequential feedback. But here's where you apply the day's additional learning. Instead of simply maintaining fire for warmth, you use it for healing and recovery. You heat stones in the flames, then apply them wrapped in cloth to sore muscles, creating primitive heat therapy that increases blood flow and accelerates healing. You prepare an improvised tea from pine needles gathered during the day, providing vitamin C and warm liquid that counters the dehydration that comes from breathing cold, dry air. Cleomenes works on food preparation, taking the evening ration of dried meat and barley and transforming it into something more nourishing through simple cooking techniques. The dried meat becomes tender when simmered in water, releasing fats and proteins into broth that provides more usable nutrition than eating it dry. The barley softens into gruel that's easier to digest and more satisfying despite being the same quantity of grain. You might recognize these techniques as universal cooking basics, but in the context of warriors cooking over open fires in caves with minimal equipment, they represent significant knowledge application. Warriors who could transform basic rations into more nourishing meals gained advantages in health and morale over armies that simply consumed standard-issue food without enhancement. The evening passes in productive activity, maintaining fire, preparing food, tending minor injuries, and discussing the day's lessons. The conversation between you and Cleomenes has deepened from the formal exchanges of early training to something approaching friendship, built on shared hardship and mutual respect. "Do you think we're stronger than we were yesterday?" Cleomenes asks, adjusting his position closer to the fire as the cave temperature drops with nightfall. The question seems simple but contains layers of meaning. Physical strength? Probably not. If anything, you're more fatigued, more depleted, carrying minor injuries and deep exhaustion. But strength in the broader sense, capability, resilience, confidence, skill, absolutely yes. You're stronger in every way that matters for warriors, even if you're temporarily weaker in ways that gym measurements would capture. Stronger in ways that last, you answer, and Cleomenes nods understanding. The distinction between temporary depletion and permanent development is something you've both come to understand through experience. Here's a historical fact about Spartan training philosophy. They deliberately cycled between intense conditioning periods and recovery phases, understanding that adaptation occurs during rest following stress, not during the stress itself. Modern sports science calls this periodization, but the Spartans discovered it through empirical observation of how warriors developed over time. The night watch rotation proceeds smoothly, each of you taking turns tending fire and maintaining awareness while the other rests. But the rest is deeper and more restorative than the previous night. Your bodies are adapting to the harsh conditions, finding efficiency in sleep that compensates for the poor environment. This is another layer of conditioning, learning to rest effectively in imperfect circumstances. During your second watch, in the small hours when the darkness is absolute and the only sounds are fire pops and distant water drips, you find yourself reflecting on the transformation that's occurring. 2 days ago, you would have thought spending nights in freezing caves was impossible. Now it feels manageable, even comfortable in its own harsh way. The shift isn't in the caves. They're still cold, still dark, still uncomfortable by any civilized standard. The shift is in you. Your body has adapted to generate more heat, to rest in discomfort, to function on minimal food. Your mind has adapted to find calm in hardship, to maintain focus despite challenges, to draw strength from conditions that would break unprepared spirits. Fringe. Fact. Some philosophical Spartans, influenced by emerging Stoic thought, viewed harsh training as a form of spiritual development rather than merely physical conditioning. They believed that mastering external discomfort taught mastery of internal passions and desires, creating warriors who were as disciplined in peace as in war. This philosophy would later influence Roman military culture and medieval warrior traditions. The second night passes without incident, marking it as successful by the harsh standards of survival training. No fire emergencies, no injuries, no failures requiring outside intervention. When dawnlight begins to penetrate the cave system, you and Cleomenes are already awake, having anticipated Lysander's likely timing for assembly. The third dawn brings an announcement that sends a current of anticipation through the assembled warriors. "Today we return to the city," Lysander declares. "But the return is not a retreat to comfort, it is the final test of everything you've learned. We march through the high passes, through our terrain that has broken armies and killed unprepared travellers. You will carry full equipment, maintain formation, and arrive in condition to fight immediately upon reaching the barracks. This is what separates Spartan warriors from soft men who play at war." The weight of this pronouncement settles over the group like the snow that's beginning to fall from a sky gone grey and heavier with winter storm. You glance at Cleomenes and see your own mixture of exhaustion and determination reflected in his face. 2 days of intensive conditioning, minimal food, interrupted sleep in freezing caves, and now a forced march through mountain passes in deteriorating weather carrying full combat equipment. You might think this sounds like madness, like pushing men beyond any reasonable limit. But here's what you're beginning to understand. The Spartans never trained to reasonable limits. They trained to the edge of the impossible, because battles don't respect reasonable limits and enemies don't attack when conditions are favourable. The equipment distribution reveals just how challenging this march will be. Each warrior receives a full panoply, the complete battle kit that hoplites carried into combat. The bronze breastplate alone weighs perhaps 15 pounds, the shield another 18, the spear 5, the short sword 3, the helmet another 4 pounds. Add the basic clothing and supplies, and each warrior will march carrying 40 to 50 pounds of equipment over mountain terrain in winter storm conditions. Here's a historical fact that contextualizes this challenge. Spartan armies were known for their ability to force march with full equipment, covering distances that other armies required 2 or 3 days to traverse. During the Peloponnesian War, Spartan forces repeatedly achieved tactical surprise by appearing days earlier than enemies thought possible, having marched at speeds that seemed superhuman to contemporaries. The armour fitting process is ritualised and precise. Each piece must be positioned correctly, or it will cause injuries during the long march. The breastplate sits on your shoulders and is strapped around your torso, distributing weight across your frame. The fit is intentionally tight, limiting movement slightly, but ensuring the armour doesn't shift and create pressure points during hours of marching. The shield is most challenging, 18 pounds of wood and bronze that must be carried on your left arm for the entire march, never set down, never transferred to the other arm, maintaining the constant readiness that characterised Spartan military culture. Your arm already aches from yesterday's shield drills, and the thought of carrying this weight for hours through mountain passes seems overwhelming. But you notice something as you settle the shield into position. Your body knows how to carry it now. Yesterday's drills weren't just building strength, they were teaching your muscles and nervous system the optimal positions and micro-adjustments that make sustained carrying possible. The shield still feels heavy, but it feels manageable in ways it wouldn't have before the conditioning. You might recognise this as the principle of specificity in training, practicing exactly what you'll need to perform under stress. Modern special forces use the same approach, training with actual mission equipment rather than training light and hoping soldiers can adapt when it matters. The Spartans discovered this through the harsh teacher of battlefield necessity. The formation assembles with 30 warriors arrayed in 3 ranks of 10, shields overlapping, spears held vertically beside shields. The formation is both tactical and practical. Tactical because it maintains combat readiness even during movement. Practical because the overlapping shields create slight wind protection for the warriors in the middle ranks, sharing the environmental burden across the group. Lysander takes the lead position, moving with the same economical efficiency that has characterized his every action. The column begins moving upslope, following a trail that climbs immediately into terrain more challenging than anything you've traversed during the previous 2 days. The path is narrow, rocky, covered in fresh snow that's still falling from the heavy grey sky above. The marching cadence is slower than you'd walk unburdened, but maintaining it with 40 pounds of equipment while climbing steep grades requires constant effort. Your breathing deepens, drawing cold air into your lungs with each inhalation. The air is so cold it stings your throat, and you remember Lysander's teaching about warming air through nasal breathing before it reaches delicate lung tissue. The snowfall intensifies as you climb higher, reducing visibility to perhaps 30 or 40 feet. The warrior ahead of you becomes a dim figure in the swirling white, visible mainly by the red of his cloak. You focus on maintaining distance and position, trusting that Lysander knows the route, even in conditions where landmarks disappear into white confusion. Here's a historical fact about Spartan navigation capabilities. They trained extensively in navigation by terrain feel and dead reckoning, developing abilities to maintain course even when visibility was zero. This skill was crucial in an era before compasses or maps, when armies that got lost in storms could wander into disaster, while forces with superior navigation reached their objectives. The temperature continues dropping as altitude increases and the storm intensifies. What might have been 30 degrees at dawn feels like it's approaching 20, and the wind that whips through the mountain passes drives the cold deeper. Your exposed face, the only skin not covered by cloak or armour, begins to numb, and you periodically press your hand against your cheeks to maintain circulation and prevent frostbite. But here's where the 2 days of conditioning reveal their value. Your body responds to this cold differently than it would have before the training. Your blood vessels constrict and dilate with practiced efficiency. Your muscles generate heat through controlled tension, and most importantly, your mind remains calm and focused despite conditions that would induce panic in unprepared individuals. The march continues for what feels like hours, climbing higher into passes where the wind screams between rock walls and the snow accumulates in drifts that sometimes reach your knees. The trail becomes more difficult to distinguish from surrounding terrain, forcing Lysander to occasionally pause and probe ahead with his spear to find solid ground beneath deceptive snow cover. You might wonder how he navigates in these conditions. The answer lies in a combination of memorized terrain features, subtle observations about slope and drainage patterns, and the kind of intuitive knowledge that comes from decades of mountain experience. He's reading the landscape through indicators invisible to less experienced eyes, the way wind shapes snow accumulation, how certain rock types weather into distinctive formations, which vegetation patterns indicate solid ground versus hidden crevasses. The formation maintains cohesion despite the challenging terrain and deteriorating visibility. Each warrior stays close to the man ahead, using sound and peripheral vision to maintain position when direct sight is impossible. The overlapping shields create not just physical connection, but psychological continuity. You can feel the presence of your brothers even when you can barely see them. A warrior in the front rank stumbles on hidden ice beneath the snow, going down on one knee with a grunt of surprise. Instantly, the warrior behind him adjusts position to maintain shield wall integrity, and hands reach out to help him regain footing without breaking formation. The entire sequence takes perhaps 3 seconds, and the column continues moving with barely a pause. This automatic mutual support demonstrates the brotherhood forged through shared hardship. No commands were given, no discussion required. Warriors simply responded to a brother's need with immediate assistance, then returned to their positions. This is the kind of unit cohesion that made Spartan armies so effective, forces that operated like single organisms rather than collections of individuals. Fringe fact: some ancient sources describe Spartan formations maintaining perfect cohesion even when individual warriors were killed or incapacitated, with others automatically filling gaps and maintaining the shield wall's integrity. While this might be partially exaggerated, it reflects the reality that Spartan training created unprecedented levels of tactical coordination. The path begins descending after reaching what must be the high pass. though visibility is so poor you couldn't see any summit or landmark. The descent proves more treacherous than the climb, with gravity and snow-slicked surfaces conspiring to send you sliding if you're not carefully controlled in every step. The shield makes balance more difficult, its weight wanting to pull you forward when terrain slopes downward. You learn to compensate by leaning slightly back, by taking smaller steps that never fully commit your weight until you're certain of footing, by using your spear as a third point of contact for extra stability. These techniques aren't taught through verbal instruction. They emerge from necessity, your body and mind solving problems in real time under conditions where mistakes have immediate consequences. The snow continues falling and you begin to notice accumulation on your cloak and equipment. A white layer building on horizontal surfaces, turning you gradually into a moving snow-covered figure. But the accumulation brings its own form of insulation, creating a boundary layer between your body heat and the external cold. You leave the snow rather than brushing it off, accepting this small gift from the environment that's trying to kill you. Here's something you might not expect. Despite the brutal conditions, you begin to feel a strange kind of joy. Not happiness exactly, you're too cold and tired and hungry for that. But joy in a deeper sense, the satisfaction that comes from functioning effectively under extreme challenges, from discovering capabilities you didn't know you possessed, from being part of a brotherhood that shares this intensity. The march continues through the afternoon hours, marked by the gradual dimming of the light filtered through storm clouds and falling snow. Time becomes difficult to track, each step blends into the next. Each breath supports another step in a rhythm that becomes almost meditative despite the physical demands. You find yourself entering the same state you discovered during the cave fire watch, a twilight consciousness where you're simultaneously intensely focused and peacefully detached. Your body performs the complex tasks of maintaining formation and balance almost automatically, while your mind floats in a space beyond normal thought, observing without judgment, experiencing without resistance. This state is what the Spartans called the warrior's trance, a condition of effortless intensity that emerges during extreme sustained effort. Modern researchers studying flow states and peak performance would recognize elements of what you're experiencing. The dissolution of self-consciousness, the merging of action and awareness, the sense of time distortion. But the Spartans discovered it through direct physical ordeal rather than psychological research. The descent continues until the terrain begins to level somewhat, indicating you've passed through the high mountains and are approaching the valleys that lead to Sparta. The storm begins to ease, snowfall decreasing, visibility improving slightly, wind dropping from the sustained scream that characterized the high passes to intermittent gusts. As the weather clears, you catch glimpses of the landscape, snow-covered slopes stretching away on either side, the trail you followed marked by the tracks of 30 warriors now being gradually obscured by continuing snowfall, and in the far distance, hints of the Laconian Valley, where Sparta sits like a fortress in the heart of defended territory. Lysander calls a brief halt, the first since the march began, hours ago. "Rest for 5 minutes," he announces. "Water and assess for injuries, then we continue." The final distance separates those who can finish strong from those who merely survive to completion. The 5-minute rest feels simultaneously too short and perfectly adequate. You drink from the skin of water you've carried, grateful that body heat has kept it from freezing solid. You check your feet, cold and tired but functional, no signs of the frostbite that would sideline you. You adjust your armour and shield position, redistributing weight to muscles that are still relatively fresh. Around you, your brothers perform similar assessments. Some are showing signs of deep fatigue, movements slightly slower, faces drawn with exhaustion. Others seem energized, drawing strength from the knowledge that the end is approaching. But everyone is functional. Everyone is ready to continue. Nobody requests to drop out or fall behind. Here's a historical fact about Spartan march discipline. They had virtually zero straggler rates during forced marches, while other Greek armies regularly lost 10 to 20% of their strength to soldiers who couldn't maintain pace. The difference wasn't physical capacity. It was the mental conditioning that made falling behind unthinkable, and the physical preparation that made sustained performance possible. The final leg begins with renewed purpose. The trail widens as you descend into more populated terrain, passing stone shepherds' huts that sit empty during winter, crossing frozen streams on natural stone bridges, moving through olive groves where ancient trees stand bare and patient under their burden of snow. The familiarity of the landscape energizes the formation. You're approaching home, approaching the barracks where this ordeal began what feels like a lifetime ago. But the energy isn't relief at the trial's end, it's pride at having endured successfully, and determination to finish strong rather than merely finish. You might notice how your relationship with the cold has changed over these 3 days. What began as an enemy to be endured has become almost a companion, a teacher that has revealed truths about your capabilities and your limitations. You're still cold, the temperature hasn't risen, the environment hasn't become less harsh, but you've changed, and that change has transformed what the cold means to you. The formation enters the final valley where Sparta sits beside the Eurotas River. The city comes into view, simple buildings arranged without walls or fortifications, the famous Spartan confidence that their warriors were protection enough against any enemy. Smoke rises from various hearths, and you can see helots moving about on evening tasks, but the warriors' barracks complex stands apart, austere and functional. As you approach the final distance, Lysander increases the pace, not dramatically, but enough to require additional effort from warriors who have been marching for perhaps 6 or 7 hours, with full equipment through mountain passes in winter storm. The increase is intentional, ensuring that warriors arrive fatigued but not broken, tested but still capable of immediate action if needed. The final 100 yards is almost ceremonial. The formation tightens, shields align with renewed precision, and 30 warriors approach their home barracks, looking like they're entering battle rather than returning from training. The pride is palpable, the sense of accomplishment shared among brothers who have endured together what few humans have ever attempted. You reach the barracks courtyard as the sun, hidden all day behind storm clouds, makes a final appearance near the western horizon. The light breaks through the clouds in shafts that illuminate the snow-covered city like divine spotlight, and for a moment the scene looks like something from legend rather than daily reality. Lysander turns to face the formation, his weathered face showing something that might be approval, might even be pride. "You have completed the winter trial," he says simply. "Equipment to the armory, then evening meal and rest. Tomorrow we evaluate what you've learned. Dismissed." The formation breaks, but the transformation it has forged in you and your brothers remains. You are no longer the warriors who entered training 3 days ago. You've been refined in the crucible of systematic hardship, forged into something stronger and more capable than you were before. The interior of the barracks feels almost shockingly warm after 3 days of constant cold, though in reality it's barely warmer than the outside air, maybe 40 degrees instead of the mid-20s that characterize the mountain passes. But the perception of warmth demonstrates how dramatically your baseline has shifted. What would have felt cold 3 days ago now feels almost luxurious. You remove your armor with practiced efficiency, each piece requiring specific techniques to avoid damage to the equipment or injury to yourself. The bronze breastplate, heavy with accumulated moisture from your body heat meeting cold metal, requires careful manipulation to lift over your head without straining your exhausted shoulders. The shield, which has been your constant companion for hours, feels strangely light once you finally set it down. Your arm almost floats upward, having adapted to the sustained weight. Here's something you might not realize. The muscle adaptation from carrying heavy loads for extended periods creates strength gains that persist long after the immediate fatigue fades. Modern strength training calls this time under tension, but the Spartans discovered it through the practical necessity of creating warriors who could march all day carrying equipment and still fight effectively upon arrival. The equipment storage is as ritualized as everything else in Spartan culture. Shields are hung on the designated pegs in specific order, reflecting rank and assignment. Spears are placed in racks designed to prevent the bronze tips from being damaged by contact. Breastplates are inspected for damage or excessive wear before being stored. The entire process takes perhaps 10 minutes and is performed in near silence, each warrior focused on the care of equipment that their life depends on. You notice Cleomenes examining his shield where it caught against a rock during the descent, leaving a small dent in the bronze rim. The damage is minor, cosmetic rather than structural, but he frowns at it, not from vanity, but from the professional concern of a craftsman whose tool shows wear. "Adds character," you comment quietly, and he nods with a slight smile. "Every mark tells a story," he agrees. Better to earn them in training than discover equipment failures in battle. The wisdom in this statement reflects the Spartan relationship with equipment, neither worshipping the tools nor treating them carelessly, but maintaining them with the respect that useful things deserve. Modern military cultures have similar attitudes toward weapons and gear, understanding that equipment properly maintained rarely fails at critical moments. The evening meal awaits in the common mess hall, and the smell of food, even the simple barley and black broth, creates a hunger response so powerful it's almost painful. Your body, which has been functioning on minimal calories for 3 days while performing extreme physical work, desperately craves fuel to replenish depleted reserves. But here's where the discipline reveals itself. Despite ravenous hunger, warriors file into the mess hall with the same controlled precision they bring to everything else. No rushing, no scrambling for the position, no loss of composure despite physical need. The lesson has been ingrained so deeply that it functions automatically. Warriors maintain discipline precisely when instinct demands otherwise. The portions tonight are larger than during the mountain training, probably double what you received in the caves. The barley bread is softer and more palatable, supplemented with additional cheese and olives and even some dried fish that provides valuable fats and proteins. The black broth remains unpleasant, but your depleted body accepts it gratefully as the fuel it desperately needs. You might notice how food tastes after extreme deprivation and exertion. The simple barley bread has complex flavours your tongue never detected when eating it fresh and well fed. Subtle sweetness from the grain, earthy undertones from stone-ground milling, even the faint tang of the yeast that leavened it. The cheese explodes with intense saltiness and fat richness that well-fed palates might find overwhelming, but that your depleted system craves with desperate intensity. The eating pace is deliberately slow despite hunger. You've been trained to chew thoroughly, to allow your stomach to recognize satiation before you consume too much too quickly. Rapid eating after extended fasting can cause serious digestive problems, something the Spartans learned through hard experience and now teach to prevent warriors from incapacitating themselves through poor meal discipline. The mess hall fills with quiet conversation as warriors compare experiences from the 3-day trial. You hear discussions of different challenges faced during the cave nights, observations about the march route, and the subtle competitiveness that characterizes Spartan culture. Each warrior wanting to know how his performance compared to others, not from insecurity, but from the drive for continuous improvement. Fringe fact: some ancient sources describe elaborate verbal contests during Spartan meals, where warriors would compete in wit and wisdom, demonstrating that their laconic speech style wasn't about lack of verbal skill, but rather about precision and economy of expression. The famous Spartan brevity was a choice, not a limitation. Lysander makes a brief appearance during the meal, moving through the hall with his characteristic presence that combines authority with something approaching paternal concern. He pauses at different tables, asking questions about the march, checking on warriors who showed signs of particular difficulty, offering brief words of acknowledgement to those who performed exceptionally. When he reaches your table, he looks at you and Cleomenes with an expression that's difficult to read. "Your fire management in the caves was exemplary," he says simply, "and your mutual support during the march showed proper understanding of Brotherhood. Continue developing these capabilities." The praise is minimal by the modern standards, no effusive compliments, no dramatic recognition. But from Lysander, these few words carry enormous weight. He doesn't waste speech on empty flattery, so his acknowledgement means he genuinely observed competence worth noting. The satisfaction you feel from this brief recognition is disproportionate to the words themselves, but entirely appropriate to what they represent. Here's a historical fact about Spartan leadership culture. Commanders were trained to observe constantly and provide specific, meaningful feedback rather than generic praise or criticism. This approach created learning environments where warriors understood exactly what behaviours to continue or modify, accelerating skill development beyond what vague feedback could achieve. The meal concludes, and warriors begin the evening routine, equipment final checks, personal hygiene with cold water and rough soap, and the preparation of sleeping areas that will feel luxurious tonight despite being objectively the same thin pallets on stone floors that felt harsh 3 days ago. Everything is relative, and your baseline has shifted so dramatically that the barracks feels almost comfortable. You settle onto your pallet with a sensation approaching bliss. The straw mattress, unchanged from 3 days ago, feels soft compared to the cave floors you've been sleeping on. The single wool cloak, adequate but not excessive, feels warm after nights spent managing heat through fire and the body position. Most importantly, the knowledge that you can sleep through the night without watch rotations or fire management creates a sense of security that's almost overwhelming. Around you, 29 other warriors are experiencing similar reactions, audible sighs of relief as bodies sink into sleeping positions, quiet murmurs of conversation fading quickly into silence as exhaustion claims consciousness, and the steady breathing of men who have earned their rest through extreme exertion. You might expect to fall asleep immediately, given the accumulated fatigue of 3 days with minimal rest. But instead, you find yourself lying awake for a few moments, mind processing the experiences with the clarity that comes after intense physical trials. Images flash through your awareness. The river's cold shock, the cave's darkness illuminated by hard-won fire, the snow-covered mountain passes, the formation maintaining cohesion despite weather and exhaustion. Each memory carries lessons that are beginning to integrate into deeper understanding. The cold taught you about adaptation and resilience. The hunger taught you about self-sufficiency and resource management. The Brotherhood taught you about collective strength exceeding individual capability. And the entire trial taught you that human limitations are far more flexible than you previously imagined. The philosophical dimension of what you've experienced is beginning to emerge. This wasn't just physical conditioning, it was transformation at multiple levels simultaneously. Your body has been strengthened and adapted. Your skills have been developed through practical application under stress. Your understanding of your own capabilities has been revolutionized, and your connection to your brothers has deepened into bonds that transcend normal human relationships. Here is something you might not fully appreciate yet. The Spartans weren't just creating warriors capable of fighting well, they were creating men capable of governance and leadership. The same discipline and self-knowledge developed through winter trials would later serve in political deliberations, diplomatic missions, and the complex decision-making required to manage a society. The Agoge system produced not just soldiers, but citizens worthy of their power. Sleep finally claims you, pulling you down into darkness deeper and more restorative than any you've experienced in days. Your dreams are surprisingly peaceful, not the violent or stressful imagery you might expect after such trials, but quiet scenes of rivers flowing, fires burning steady, mountains standing patient under snow. Your subconscious is processing the experiences into integrated understanding, filing lessons learned into the deep knowledge that will inform future decisions without conscious thought. You wake to the bronze bell's familiar ring, but this morning brings a difference you can feel immediately. Your body responds with less stiffness, less reluctance. The recovery capacity developed through years of training has been processing the stress of the past 3 days, and despite the minimal rest, you feel surprisingly functional. Sore, yes. Tired, certainly, but capable, ready, even eager for whatever training the day will bring. The morning routine proceeds with the efficiency that has become second nature, rising immediately at the bell, simple ablutions with cold water, dressing in the basic chiton, and assembling in the courtyard as the first pale light touches the eastern peaks. But this morning the routine feels different, charged with the awareness of how much you've changed in just 3 days. Lysandra appears with several other senior trainers you recognise but who haven't been directly involved in your winter trial. Their presence suggests something significant, perhaps evaluation, perhaps graduation to the next training phase, perhaps some formal recognitions of what you've accomplished. The winter trial is complete, Lysander announces, his voice carrying clearly in the still morning air. But before you return to standard training rotation, we will examine what you learned. Not through spoken questions, words are cheap and easily memorized without understanding. We evaluate through demonstration and application. The format he describes is quintessentially Spartan, knowledge proven through action rather than recitation, understanding demonstrated through performance rather than explanation. It's a form of assessment that's completely honest, revealing true capability rather than the facade that verbal cleverness can create. You might recognize this as similar to modern practical examinations used in medicine, aviation, and military special operations, fields where the stakes are too high to rely on theoretical knowledge alone. The Spartans pioneered this approach in military training, understanding that warriors who can talk about tactics but not execute them are worse than useless in battle. The first evaluation is in individual cold tolerance. Each warrior must enter the Eurotas River, still running cold and fast with snowmelt from the mountains, and maintain a specific defensive position while submerged to the waist for a measured duration. The test isn't endurance for its own sake, it's demonstrating the ability to maintain combat effectiveness under conditions that would incapacitate unconditioned soldiers. When your turn comes, you wade into the familiar shocking cold with a calmness that would have been impossible 3 days ago. The water feels intensely cold, yes, but no longer overwhelming. Your body responds with practiced efficiency, blood vessels constricting to preserve core temperature, breathing remaining controlled despite the cold shock response, mind maintaining focus despite the environmental assault. The defensive position requires holding your shield steady while maintaining balance against the current, a simulation of fighting in water during amphibious operations or river crossings under enemy pressure. The challenge is substantial. The water's force pushes against your shield, the cold numbs the arm holding it, and the uneven riverbed beneath your feet shifts with the current. But here's where the training reveals its value. You've learned to compartmentalize the discomfort, to experience cold as information rather than crisis, to maintain technique even when physical sensation is screaming for attention. The shield stays steady, your stance remains solid, and your breathing continues in the controlled patterns that maximize oxygen while minimizing heat loss. The evaluators observe without comment, their experienced eyes noting details invisible to untrained observers, whether your shield position drifts as muscles fatigue, whether your stance narrows as cold affects your balance, whether your breathing becomes erratic as stress accumulates. After perhaps 2 minutes, which feels much longer when you're experiencing it, they signal completion, and you wade from the river with a sense of accomplishment that's disproportionate to such a simple task. Here's a historical fact that validates this training approach. Spartan forces conducted successful amphibious operations throughout the Peloponnesian War, including complex river crossings under enemy observation that other Greek armies considered impossible. The individual cold water training you just completed translates directly to military operations that gave Sparta strategic advantages. The next evaluation tests partnership cohesion. You and Cleomenes must work together to accomplish tasks requiring coordination under stress. The specific challenge involves moving a heavy stone, perhaps 200 pounds, across difficult terrain while maintaining defensive readiness, simulating the kind of logistics work that armies must perform while under potential enemy threat. The task requires constant communication and mutual adjustment. When you lift one side, Cleomenes must lift the other in perfect synchronization, or the stone's weight becomes impossible to manage. When terrain requires one person to step higher or lower, the other must compensate to keep the stone level. And throughout the exercise you must remain aware of your surroundings, maintaining the alertness that prevents ambush. You find that the communication between you and Cleomenes has evolved beyond words. A slight shift in his body position tells you he's about to adjust grip. A change in his breathing indicates he's reaching fatigue and needs you to bear more weight temporarily. The partnership has become almost telepathic, not through supernatural means, but through intense shared experience that has taught you to read each other's subtle signals. Fringe fact: some ancient sources describe Spartan warrior pairs developing such profound non-verbal communication that they could coordinate complex combat maneuvers in absolute darkness or through visual obstructions that would scatter other formations. While this might be exaggerated, it reflects the reality that Spartan partnership training created unprecedented levels of tactical coordination. The third evaluation is more subtle and perhaps more important. It tests judgment and decision-making under ambiguous conditions. Each warrior is presented with a scenario described verbally, then must make immediate tactical decisions without time for extended deliberation. The scenarios are deliberately unclear, lacking the clean information that comfortable classroom discussions might provide. You're leading a patrol of 10 warriors through mountain passes in winter storm, the evaluator presents. Visibility is minimal. You hear sounds ahead that might be enemy movement or might be natural phenomena. Your orders are to gather information, but you have wounded who need medical attention soon. What do you do? The scenario has no perfect answer. Any decision involves trade-offs and risks. But the evaluation isn't looking for perfect answers. It's assessing whether you can make reasonable decisions quickly despite uncertainty, whether you consider multiple factors before choosing, and whether your reasoning reflects the values and priorities that Spartan culture emphasizes. Send 2 fastest warriors forward as scouts while the main group finds shelter and treats wounded, you answer after brief consideration. Scouts have orders to observe but not engage unless attacked. If they don't return within measured time, assume enemy contact and prepare defensive position. If they return reporting clear passage, move the group forward once wounded are stable enough for travel. The evaluator nods without indicating whether your answer was correct, probably because there is no single correct answer, only responses that show sound judgment versus poor thinking. But you feel confident that your response demonstrated the key principles: mission accomplishment balanced against force preservation, use of small teams for reconnaissance, clear contingency planning, and priority on maintaining combat effectiveness even while addressing casualties. Here's a historical fact about Spartans: tactical decision-making. They were famous for making quick decisions based on incomplete information, a skill that gave them tempo advantages over enemies who waited for perfect intelligence before acting. This decisiveness was built through exactly the kind of training you're experiencing: repeated practice making imperfect decisions under pressure until the process becomes automatic. The evaluations continue through morning and into afternoon, testing various aspects of what the winter trial was designed to teach. Some tests are purely physical. Can you still perform after 3 days of minimal rest and nutrition? Others are technical. Have you actually learned the skills that were taught, or did you merely endure the experience without integrating lessons? And still others are psychological. Do you maintain composure under stress, support your brothers automatically, make sound judgments when tired and uncomfortable? You're surprised to find that you're performing well across all evaluation types. The physical tests are challenging but manageable. Your body has adapted enough that what would have been impossible before the trial is now difficult but achievable. The technical skills have been integrated through direct application under stress, creating knowledge that lives in your muscles and reflexes rather than just your conscious mind. And the psychological elements feel almost natural now. You've discovered capabilities and confidence through the trial that weren't accessible before you proved them to yourself. As evening approaches and the formal evaluations conclude, the atmosphere shifts in a way you haven't experienced during your time in training. The trainers announce that tonight there will be a symposium, a gathering for discussion, reflection, and the sharing of knowledge among warriors. This isn't the famous Greek symposium of philosophers and wine drinking in Athens. This is the Spartan version, focused on military wisdom and the integration of recent experiences into deeper understanding. The symposium space is a long hall adjacent to the barracks, simply furnished with benches arranged in a rough circle. Unlike the mess hall's rigid seating hierarchy, the symposium arrangement suggests more equality, though you notice that senior warriors and trainers still occupy positions of prominence. A small fire burns in the central hearth, not for warmth primarily, but for light and the psychological comfort that fire provides to humans across all cultures. You might wonder why Spartans, famous for their laconic speech and action-oriented culture, would value discussion and reflection. The answer reveals a sophistication that stereotypes about Spartan anti-intellectualism miss. They valued the right kind of thinking, focused on practical wisdom rather than abstract philosophy, on lessons learned through experience rather than theories disconnected from reality. The symposium begins with senior warriors sharing stories from their own winter trials, not boasting, but teaching through narrative. An older warrior describes a trial years ago when a sudden storm killed 2 trainees who made poor decisions about shelter and what lessons their deaths taught the survivors about preparation and risk assessment. Another describes a winter campaign during the Peloponnesian War, when the cold weather skills learned in training allowed his unit to achieve an objective that seemed impossible, turning the tide of a larger battle. These stories serve multiple purposes simultaneously. They honour the dead by ensuring their mistakes teach future generations. They transmit tactical knowledge in memorable narrative form rather than dry instruction. They build connection between generations of warriors, showing younger men that their current struggles are part of a continuum stretching back through time. And they reinforce the culture's values. What behaviours merit remembering? What outcomes justify hardship? What purposes give meaning to suffering? Here's a historical fact about oral tradition in Spartan military culture. Before widespread literacy, military knowledge was primarily transmitted through exactly these kinds of structured storytelling sessions. The stories were carefully crafted to contain tactical lessons, cultural values, and emotional resonance that made them memorable and repeatable. Modern military training increasingly recognizes the value of case studies and after-action reviews, approaches that Spartans pioneered thousands of years ago. As the evening progresses, younger warriors are invited to share observations from the recent trial. There's no compulsion to speak, but the invitation creates space for those who have insights to offer them. The sharing is remarkably thoughtful. Warriors describing moments when they discovered new capabilities, challenges that revealed limitations they need to address, observations about how partnership dynamics functioned under stress. Cleomenes speaks about the fire-making in the caves, describing the moment when flame first appeared and what it taught him about creating warmth and security through skill rather than dependence on external provisions. His reflection goes beyond the physical task to the psychological dimension, how the ability to create fire changed his relationship with the harsh environment, transforming him from victim of circumstances to someone who could shape his environment through knowledge and effort. When your turn comes, you find yourself describing the moment in the river when you stopped fighting the cold and instead learned to work with it, using breathing and mental focus to function effectively despite the environmental challenge. As you speak, you realize that this lesson extends far beyond cold water. It's about the fundamental relationship between warrior and adversity, about finding strength through acceptance rather than resistance, about the paradox that surrendering the fight against circumstances often allows better performance within those circumstances. The discussion that follows your sharing reveals layers of meaning you hadn't consciously recognized. An older warrior connects your observation to combat psychology, how fighting against fear often amplifies it, while accepting fear and functioning despite it allows effective action. Another draws parallels to pain management. Warriors who resist pain often suffer more than those who acknowledge it without being controlled by it. The Symposium is revealing connections between different domains of warrior experience, showing how lessons from cold water training apply to everything from battle stress to personal relationships. Fringe fact. Some sources describe Spartan symposia, including poetry and music, art forms that might seem incongruous with their warrior culture. But the Spartans understood that different modes of expression access different kinds of understanding. A lesson conveyed through poetry might penetrate deeper than the same concept explained in plain speech. Their famous brevity didn't mean they lacked appreciation for artful expression. Rather, they valued precision and impact over verbosity. As the fire burns lower and the evening deepens, Lysander offers concluding thoughts that tie together the various discussions. The winter trial teaches many lessons, he says, his weathered face half illuminated by firelight. Endurance, yes. Skill, certainly. Brotherhood, without question. But the deepest lesson is about transformation, learning that you are not fixed, that your capabilities are not limited to what felt possible before you tested them. He pauses, letting the words settle, and you realize he's articulating something you felt but couldn't quite express. The past 3 days have fundamentally changed your understanding of what you're capable of, not just physically but in every dimension. You've discovered that cold is manageable, that hunger doesn't prevent effective functioning, that exhaustion can be pushed through, that fear and discomfort can be experienced without being controlled by them. Warriors who understand they can transform will continue growing throughout their lives, Lysander continues. Warriors who believe their current capabilities are their permanent limits will stagnate and eventually fail when challenges exceed those limits. The trial teaches that limits are temporary and flexible, not permanent and rigid. This knowledge is more valuable than any physical conditioning, because it ensures you will continue developing long after formal training ends. The philosophical depth of this teaching surprises you, revealing yet another dimension of Spartan warrior culture. They're not just creating physically capable soldiers, they're developing men with growth mindsets, with psychological resilience, with the self-knowledge that enables continuous improvement. The winter trial was a physical ordeal with a psychological purpose hardship designed to reveal potential rather than merely test current capacity. Here's a historical fact that demonstrates the long-term effectiveness of this approach. Spartan warriors were known for maintaining peak effectiveness well into their 40s and 50s, ages when most ancient soldiers were considered past their prime. The difference wasn't superior genetics, it was the mindset developed through training like the winter trial, which taught continuous adaptation rather than static achievement. The Symposium concludes with a ritual that's simple but meaningful. Each warrior feeds a small offering into the central fire while speaking a brief acknowledgement of something learned or someone who helped them learn it. When your turn comes, you offer a piece of wood while saying, "I acknowledge Cleomenes, whose partnership showed me that strength multiplies through cooperation, not just addition." Cleomenes, when his turn comes, acknowledges you in return, creating a reciprocal recognition that deepens the bond between you. Around the circle, similar acknowledgements flow, warriors recognizing trainers, partnerships, the memory of those who died in previous trials, even the mountain itself and the river and the cold as teachers that offered harsh but valuable lessons. The ritual serves as psychological closure for the trial, marking the transition from the extreme experience to integration of its lessons. You're no longer in the crucible. You've passed through it and emerged transformed. The acknowledgement ritual honours that transformation and the forces, human and natural, that catalysed it. The morning after the Symposium brings a different quality of training, less intense physically than the winter trial, but demanding in different ways. You're learning how the cold weather skills integrate with the broader curriculum of Spartan warrior development, how lessons learned in extreme conditions apply to the full spectrum of military operations. The day begins with phalanx drill, the fundamental formation that defines Greek hoplite warfare. But this morning's drill incorporates lessons from the winter trial deliberately. You practice maintaining formation while moving across terrain that simulates difficult conditions, ice patches, uneven ground, obstacles that require coordinated navigation while keeping shields overlapped and spears ready. You notice immediately how the winter trial has changed your performance. The shield feels lighter after days of carrying it through mountain passes. Your balance is more secure after practicing on ice and snow. Your awareness of your partner's positions is more acute after the intense coordination required during the trial. Skills that seem disconnected during training reveal themselves as integrated system, each element supporting and enhancing the others. Here's something you might not have consciously noticed. Your pain tolerance has increased substantially. The minor discomforts that would have distracted you before the trial, a strap rubbing against your shoulder, feet aching from prolonged standing, muscles burning from sustained exertion, now register as mere background sensation rather than demanding conscious attention. This increased tolerance isn't numbness or damage to your nervous system. It's recalibration of what your brain considers worth prioritizing. The phalanx drills progress from basic movement to simulated combat scenarios. Trainers acting as enemy forces probe the formation's integrity, looking for gaps or weaknesses that real enemies would exploit. The scenarios include environmental challenges deliberately, conducting drills while trainers throw water to simulate rain, while snow is kicked up to reduce visibility, while obstacles force the formation to adapt its positioning. These environmental additions transform simple drills into complex problem-solving exercises. How do you maintain shield overlap when water makes grip slippery? How do you keep formation alignment when visibility drops below 20 feet? How do you navigate obstacles while maintaining defensive integrity? Each challenge requires the formation to adapt collectively, with individual warriors making micro-adjustments that serve the whole without breaking cohesion. You might recognize this as similar to modern military training that deliberately introduces friction, complications that force adaptation and reveal how well fundamentals have been internalized. The Spartans pioneered this approach, understanding that training in clean, simple conditions produces warriors who struggle when reality proves messy and complex. The afternoon brings a different kind of training, political and social instruction that might seem incongruous with the morning's military focus. but the Spartan system recognised that warriors were also citizens who would participate in governance, and that military excellence without political wisdom created dangerous imbalance in society. The instructor, an older warrior named Brotherhood, who served with distinction in multiple campaigns and now focuses on training, begins with a question that seems simple but carries layers of meaning. Why do we train in conditions harsher than we expect to face in battle? The question invites discussion rather than demanding a single answer. Warriors offer various responses to ensure readiness for worst-case scenarios, to build confidence through mastering difficult challenges, to create capabilities that exceed what normal combat demands. Each answer has merit, and Brotherhood acknowledges the validity while building toward a deeper synthesis. All true, he says, but there's a political dimension you must understand. Sparta survives because we maintain capabilities that deter enemies from attacking. Our strength must be so evident, so fearsome, that rivals choose negotiation over war. The winter trial creates warriors who can do things others, armies cannot, and enemies who know this choose to avoid conflict. The strategic logic is profound. Military capability serves political purposes, preventing wars that would otherwise occur. The winter trial isn't just creating warriors who can fight in harsh conditions, it's creating deterrent power that makes fighting unnecessary. This connection between individual training and grand strategy reveals the integrated thinking that characterizes Spartan military culture. Here's a historical fact that demonstrates this principle in action. For nearly 200 years, Sparta's military reputation was so fearsome that most conflicts were resolved through negotiation rather than battle, with enemies choosing to concede rather than face Spartan forces in the field. This peace-through-strength approach minimized Spartan casualties while maintaining their dominance. A strategic success built on the foundation of individual warriors' extreme training. The political instruction continues with discussions of how warriors should conduct themselves during peacetime, how military virtues translate to civic participation, and how the discipline learned through training applies to self-governance and community responsibility. The connection being taught is that warrior training isn't separate from civilian life. It's preparation for citizenship in its fullest sense, creating men capable of governing themselves and their society. You might notice how different this is from societies where military and civilian roles are sharply separated. In Sparta, the warrior is the citizen, and the citizen is the warrior, with no fundamental distinction between martial training and civic preparation. The winter trial that pushed you to your physical limits was simultaneously teaching you about self-governance, about community responsibility, about the relationship between individual capability and collective strength. The day concludes with a training exercise that synthesizes military and political dimensions, a simulation where warriors must debate strategic options while under physical stress. You're required to maintain shield position in defensive stance, while participating in structured discussion about hypothetical military scenarios, demonstrating that you can think clearly even when your body is under strain. The exercise is deliberately difficult. Holding a heavy shield extended while simultaneously processing complex information and formulating coherent arguments requires capabilities that most people never develop, but it simulates the reality that commanders face, making critical decisions while exhausted, stressed, in pain, and under time pressure. Training for this reality produces leaders who can function effectively when conditions are far from optimal. As the shield hold continues and the strategic debate proceeds, you find yourself accessing mental clarity despite physical discomfort, a direct application of lessons from the winter trial. The cold water training taught you to think while experiencing intense physical sensation. The hunger training taught you to process information despite metabolic stress. The exhaustion from the mountain march taught you to maintain focus when energy reserves are depleted. All these lessons converge in this moment, allowing you to participate meaningfully in the strategic discussion despite the burning fatigue in your shield arm and the trembling in your muscles. When you offer an observation about how winter conditions might influence campaign timing, your insight is sharper and more relevant than it would have been before the trial, because you now have embodied knowledge of what winter campaigns actually entail, not just theoretical understanding. Fringe fact: some sources describe Spartan commanders making critical strategic decisions while engaged in intense physical activity, deliberately using exertion to clarify thinking and strip away extraneous considerations. While this might seem counterintuitive, Modern research into the relationship between physical stress and cognitive function suggests that moderate physiological arousal can actually enhance certain types of decision-making by increasing focus and reducing overthinking. In the days following the trial, as training returns to more regular rhythms, you begin to notice subtle but profound changes in how you experience everything. The barracks that once felt harsh now feels almost comfortable. The daily rations that once seemed barely adequate now feel sufficient. The training that once pushed you to your limits now feels manageable, even energizing. But here's what's really changed. Not the external conditions, but your internal baseline. You've been fundamentally recalibrated through the winter trial, and this recalibration affects everything you experience going forward. The cold that once seemed intolerable is now merely cool. The hunger that once dominated your awareness is now just background information. The exhaustion that once felt overwhelming is now simply tiredness to be worked through. This recalibration is the deepest lesson of the winter trial, that your relationship with hardship is more important than the hardship itself. Two warriors facing identical circumstances can have vastly different experiences based on their baseline expectations and coping mechanisms. The trial taught you to shift your baseline, to become someone for whom harsh conditions are normal rather than extreme. Here's a historical fact that demonstrates the long-term impact of this recalibration. Spartan warriors who had completed winter trials showed measurably different stress responses than warriors from other cities when subjected to harsh campaign conditions. They maintained better health, higher morale, and superior combat effectiveness, not because conditions were easier for them, but because their psychological and physiological baselines had been fundamentally altered through training. You find yourself seeking out challenges that you would have avoided before the trial. When morning training offers a choice between easier and harder routes, you automatically choose the harder one, not from masochism, but from genuine curiosity about your capabilities and confidence that you can handle difficulty. When optional advanced training sessions are offered, you volunteer, not to impress trainers, but from authentic desire to continue developing. This shift from avoiding hardship to seeking growth is perhaps the most valuable outcome of the entire trial. Warriors who learn to view challenges as opportunities rather than threats develop at exponentially faster rates than those who train defensively, trying to avoid failure rather than pursuing excellence. The winter trial taught you to train offensively, to push toward your edge rather than staying safely away from it. You notice similar changes in your brothers who completed the trial with you. There's a quiet confidence in how they move, how they speak, how they approach tasks. Not arrogance. Spartan culture ruthlessly eliminates arrogance through social pressure and deliberate humbling exercises. But genuine confidence rooted in proven capability, the knowledge that comes from having tested yourself against severe challenges and succeeded. The bond with Cleomenes has deepened into something that's difficult to name, deeper than friendship, more intimate than brotherhood by blood, approaching what modern people might call complete trust. You know without question that he would die to protect you, and he knows the same about you, not because you've spoken vows, but because you've proven it through actions during the trial. You protected each other through the cold, supported each other through exhaustion, and succeeded together when failure would have been easier. Fringe fact. Some ancient sources describe Spartan warrior pairs developing lifelong bonds from shared training experiences, maintaining partnerships through decades of military service and even in retirement. While the exact nature of these relationships is debated by scholars, their intensity and importance are clear in historical accounts. Modern military forces recognize similar phenomena in battle buddies, and small unit cohesion that develops through shared hardship. As weeks pass and the intensity of the trial fades into memory, you notice that its lessons remain vivid and applicable. When facing new challenges in training, you find yourself drawing on specific memories from the trial, remembering the cold water breathing techniques when required to perform under stress, recalling the fire-building patience when rushing would lead to mistakes, accessing the mountain march's rhythm when sustained effort is needed. The trial has become an internal resource, a library of experiences you can access when facing difficulty. This is exactly what the Spartan training system intended, not to create warriors who could only function in specific conditions they'd trained for, but to develop adaptable problem solvers who could transfer lessons from one domain to many others. You begin to understand why the Spartans invested so heavily in training that seemed excessive by other cities' standards. They weren't just building a military force adequate to defend against known threats. They were creating a warrior class with capabilities so far beyond normal that they could adapt to any challenge, anticipated or unexpected. This adaptive capacity was worth more than any specific skill set, because it ensured continued effectiveness as conditions changed. Here's a historical fact that demonstrates this adaptive capacity. When the Peloponnesian War introduced naval warfare as a major component of conflict, something Spartans had little previous experience with, they adapted more successfully than expected, eventually building a fleet that defeated the naval superpower Athens. Their ability to learn, adapt quickly in domains where they lacked expertise reflected the adaptable mindset developed through training like the winter trial. The winter that trained you is gradually yielding to spring. The snow on Mount Taygetus is receding, revealing dark rock beneath. The Eurotas River is running faster and warmer with increased snowmelt. The days are lengthening, bringing more light and warmth to the Laconian Valley. But the winter within you, the one created through the trial, remains constant. A core of tested resilience that won't fade with changing seasons. You realise that this internal winter is something you'll carry for the rest of your life. Not as trauma or damage, but as capability and confidence. You've learned that you can function in extreme conditions, that you can endure prolonged hardship, that you can maintain discipline when instinct demands surrender. These lessons don't depend on external weather. They're internal resources available whenever needed. As you stand in the barracks courtyard one evening, watching the sun set behind the western peaks and feeling the spring air that's noticeably warmer than months ago, you reflect on the journey from the frightened young man who woke to that first frozen dawn to the warrior you're becoming. The transformation isn't complete. You're still years away from being a fully developed Spartan warrior. But the foundation has been laid, forged in the crucible of systematic hardship that pushed you beyond what you thought possible. Conclusion: the lesson of Laconian winters. So as you drift towards sleep in your own warm bed tonight, thousands of miles and thousands of years away from ancient Sparta, maybe you're understanding something about human potential that our comfortable modern world often obscures. The Spartans survived the most brutal winters in history, not by avoiding them, not by simply enduring them, but by transforming them into the teachers that revealed capabilities no comfortable environment could develop. You might be wondering whether such extreme training was necessary, whether the cost was worth the capability it created. The answer depends on what you value. If comfort and safety are the highest goods, then no. Spartan training was excessive and cruel. But if capability, resilience, and the discovery of human potential matter, then the winter trials represent sophisticated wisdom about how transformation actually occurs. Here's the final historical fact to carry with you into sleep. The Spartan system lasted for over 500 years, one of the longest-running stable societies in human history. Their training methods were copied but never successfully replicated by other cities, because the methods required cultural commitment to something beyond comfort, commitment to excellence purchased through systematic hardship. Modern society has largely moved away from this approach, choosing comfort and safety over the growth that comes through challenge. Whether this represents progress or loss is something you might want to think about. We've eliminated many forms of unnecessary suffering, which is genuinely good. But we may have also eliminated the voluntary challenges that allow people to discover what they're truly capable of, the controlled hardships that reveal strength we never knew we possessed. The Spartans understood something profound that's worth contemplating as you settle deeper into your pillows. Human beings need challenges to become fully human. Not suffering for its own sake, not cruelty or abuse, but systematic progression through increasingly difficult conditions that expand capabilities and reveal potential. The winter trial wasn't punishment. It was invitation to transformation, opportunity to discover the extraordinary capacities hidden within ordinary bodies and minds. You might notice the paradox at the heart of their wisdom. Comfort creates weakness, while controlled discomfort creates strength. The warrior who sleeps in warm beds becomes dependent on warmth and suffers when it's unavailable. The warrior who learns to sleep in caves creates internal resources that function regardless of external conditions. This principle extends far beyond temperature regulation. It applies to every dimension of human capability. As your breathing slows and deepens, as your body relaxes into the comfort of your modern bed, consider what the Spartans might say about our contemporary lives. We've optimized for convenience and eliminated most physical hardship, creating societies where people can live entire lives without ever really testing their limits. Is this the pinnacle of human achievement, or have we lost something essential in the process? The answer isn't simple. The Spartan system had profound limitations and moral problems. Its dependence on slavery, its treatment of the weak, its militaristic values that left little room for other human pursuits. We shouldn't romanticize or desire to recreate their society wholesale, but we can learn from their understanding of human potential and the methods they developed for unlocking it. Here's something to drift to sleep thinking about. What would change in your life if you approached challenges the way Spartans approached winter? Not avoiding difficulty, but seeking it strategically as opportunity for growth. Not waiting until you feel ready, but understanding that readiness emerges through action rather than preceding it. Not measuring yourself against comfort, but against capability. The warriors you've journeyed with over these past hours, the young men who woke in frozen barracks, who stood naked in snow, who plunged into killing cold rivers, who spent nights in caves maintaining fire against darkness, who marched through mountain storms carrying everything needed for battle. Those warriors were ordinary young men who became extraordinary through systematic progression beyond their comfort zones. You contain the same potential they discovered in themselves. Your genetics aren't different. Your nervous system operates on the same principles. Your muscles adapt through the same mechanisms. The capacity for transformation they accessed remains available in every human body and mind, waiting to be activated through the right kinds of challenges pursued with proper progression and support. As you sink deeper into sleep, your subconscious mind processing these stories into whatever lessons it needs, maybe you're understanding why this history matters now in your world so different from ancient Sparta. The specific challenges have changed. You probably don't need to learn to sleep comfortably in freezing caves or maintain combat effectiveness in rivers, but the underlying principle remains eternally relevant. Human beings grow through challenge, transform through hardship systematically applied, and discover capabilities they never knew they possessed by testing edges they previously feared to approach. The Laconian winter that forged Spartan warriors was harsh, unforgiving, and often lethal. But it was also transformative, revelatory, and ultimately liberating, because warriors who learned they could handle winter's worst discovered they could handle anything. That psychological freedom, that confidence rooted in proven capability rather than mere hopeful belief, was perhaps the greatest gift the winter trials offered. Your eyelids are growing heavy now, your thoughts becoming softer and more diffuse as sleep approaches. Let the images drift through your awareness without trying to hold them. The snow-covered mountains, the rushing river, the cave fires burning steady through long nights, the formation of warriors moving as one through storm conditions that would scatter lesser forces. These images carry wisdom that your dreaming mind will process and integrate in ways your conscious analysis never could. The bronze bell that called those ancient warriors to wake is silent now, its echoes faded into 2,000 years of distance. The barracks are ruins if they remain at all. The Eurotas still flows through the Laconian valley, but the warriors who trained in its winter waters are long since dust. Yet the lessons they learned, the capabilities they developed, the transformation they achieved, these remain accessible to anyone willing to seek them through whatever challenges their own era provides. As you drift into sleep, know that transformation is still possible, that human potential remains as vast and largely untapped as it was in ancient times, and that the comfort surrounding you now is a gift that can either weaken you through dependence or strengthen you by choice through the voluntary challenges you pursue. The winter trials of Sparta are finished, but the winters within yourself, the challenges that could forge you into something stronger and more capable, those remain waiting for your decision to embrace them. Sleep well, knowing that the warriors whose story you followed would recognize you as kin if you choose to pursue your own transformation with even a fraction of their commitment. The specific methods change with eras, but the underlying truth remains. Human beings become extraordinary by systematically pushing beyond what feels possible, supported by brothers and sisters who share the journey, in service of purposes larger than individual comfort. The last thought to carry into your dreams: strength isn't given, it's built. Resilience isn't inherited, it's earned. And the capacity for transformation sleeps within you as surely as it did within those young Spartans who woke to frozen mornings and discovered they contained multitudes they never imagined. May your dreams be peaceful, your sleep restorative, and your tomorrow an opportunity to discover what you're truly capable of achieving. Rest now. The winter winds have quieted, the fires burn steady, your brothers sleep beside you, breath rising and falling in the rhythm of warriors who have earned their rest through efforts that transform challenge into growth, hardship into warm strength, and ordinary young men into something approaching the heroic. You're sailed, you're warm, you're enough exactly as you are. And you contain potential beyond your current imagining, waiting to be discovered through the challenges you choose to embrace. Good night. So that's how the Spartans survived the most brutal winters in history. Not just through toughness or endurance, but through systematic training that transformed environmental extremes into teachers revealing human potential. They learned to create warmth from within, to find strength through brotherhood, and to push beyond limits that would break unprepared spirits. If you enjoyed this journey into ancient Sparta's winter trials, I genuinely appreciate if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel. No pressure, only if this resonated with you and you want more historical deep dives like this. And seriously, drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing the global community that gathers during these quiet hours to explore history together. What would you have found most challenging about Spartan winter training? The cold water immersion? The cave nights? The mountain march? Or something else entirely? Let me know in the comments. I read them all, and your thoughts often inspire future videos. If you want more immersive historical content like this, I've got dozens of other sleep stories exploring everything from Viking longship voyages to medieval monastery life to ancient Roman campaigns. Check the playlist in the description and find your next journey into the past. Thanks for spending these hours with me in ancient Sparta, learning what human beings can achieve when they refuse to accept comfortable limitations. Whether you're falling asleep now or just listening while you work, study or relax, I appreciate you being here. Until next time, take care of yourselves, maybe seek out a small challenge that pushes your edges just slightly beyond comfortable. And remember, you contain capabilities you haven't discovered yet, waiting for the right trials to reveal them. Sleep well.